Chapter 251. Are you sure? Scylla asked. Honestly speaking, Wheeze was the best choice for Scylla to collect the samples. Scylla couldn't leave right now, so it was better for them to collect the samples in secret. Moreover, Guanfeng had told him that strategy was everything in the RAS. There was no such thing as a pure land. Of course, it would be a good idea to ask the fat cat to collect a sample from a Sea King. However, Scylla didn't have an accurate estimate of the Sea King's strength, and it was still up for debate whether the fat cat could safely obtain a sample from the Sea King. Hui Mao was about to explode when he heard Scylla's doubtful question. What can those fish do to me? Scylla thinks for a moment and smiled. Yes, at least his life wouldn't be in danger, even if he couldn't get a sample from the Sea King. Scylla almost forgot that the cat wasn't a pure animal. It was a machine. Do what you can, Scylla emphasized. Hui Mao flicked its ears and replied impatiently. Got it. Then it jumped out of the window Scylla had opened. Scylla, why are you snoring at a time like this? Dadwa asked in surprise when she saw Hui Mao jump out of the window. That guy's going out for a walk. It says it's bored here. Let's not talk about it. I'm bored here myself. Wally laid down on the table lazily. Although there was a life support system inside the room to balance things out, perhaps because of the architectural style, they were not used to staying in this kind of environment. It always made them feel stuffy inside. Sea beasts had already landed on the coast, and the battle between the border guards and the sea beasts had already begun. However, they couldn't hear the sound of gunfire because they were too far away. Still, they could tell just how intense the battle was from the blurry images on the internet. Thick blue mist enveloped the city, blocking the sky and some of the surveillance devices. This kind of fog was different from ordinary fog. There were some metal ions and other influencing factors in the fog. They could interfere with the detection system, so they could only know the situation of the area around each scanner. At times like this, the demand for scanning detectors would increase greatly. The people on the planet were already used to fighting in the sea fog. Even if they hadn't developed a transmission detector for this kind of sea fog, they could still quickly respond to the situation on the battlefield. A few people followed the honorary scholar to the room next door where Huang Jie and the Academy of Sciences were staying. Now, only a few people were left in the room that Scylla was familiar with. York continued to hack into the various networks on the planet to understand the situation of the battle in the area under his eyes. He showed everyone the images captured by some of the local scanners. Actually, the Royal Academy of Sciences has developed a scanner with a stronger transmission ability. Even this special sea fog should be more useful than the one here. Do you think the people from the Royal Academy of Sciences will provide some equipment to soften up that minor noble? I don't think so. Vino sneered. Let's not talk about whether that minor noble appreciates their help or not. Just look at those old geezers from the Royal Academy of Sciences. Do you really think those old geezers can be compassionate? They can't wait for the war on the planet to get more intense so that the sea beasts can attack faster. That way, the minor noble's government will suffer a setback and come over to ask for reinforcements. That way, both sides will be able to trade faster and the old geezers from the Royal Academy of Sciences will be able to flatter themselves. Indeed, if possible, those old geezers might even give them a hand in the dark. Dodwar agreed. At this rate, how long will this battle last? Yerk asked as he pointed at the images on the screen. In the images, the tremors of the cannons and the roars of the sea beasts were mixed together. It was a strange scene under the blue mist. When the mist dissipates, the sea beasts will naturally return to the sea. That's what I heard from the people outside, Kinasenza, who had just gone out, said. Kinasenza, who had just gone out, said, but I have a feeling that this fog is not normal. What do the locals say? Scylla asked. Kinasenza shook her head. They think it's normal. This time, the fog is a little thicker. Almost the entire continent is covered in a layer of mist. The central area is a little better, not as bad as the coastal areas. However, the residents here say that a fog of this scale will appear once every 20 to 30 years, or even once every 70 to 80 years. Every time it appears, the coastal areas will be severely damaged by the sea beasts. The border defense lines will have to be rebuilt after the war. It's a waste of manpower and money. Sillen sat in his chair, but did not say anything. He had a feeling that something was wrong. The fog was still as thick as ever after 2 days, but the central area of the continent was showing signs of weakening. This was undoubtedly good news for the people of the continent. It also boosted the confidence of the border guards. They would take out as many sea beasts as they could before the fog dispersed and the sea beasts retreated. Now that the situation was like this, many places in the central area had relaxed their guard levels. The place where Sillen and the others were staying was very obvious. Although the air vents on the buildings were still turned off, the people inside the buildings were a lot more relaxed than before. Some of the local soldiers would even joke around sometimes, but the people of the RAS were all frowning. For the past 2 days, the minor nobles and the planetary government seemed to have completely forgotten about them. They only sent soldiers to guard the place for protection and surveillance. Now that the battle had calmed down, Sillen and the others felt a little more at ease as well. Their rooms were surrounded by the people from the RAS, so they decided to stay in their rooms and sleep whenever they had nothing to do. They would know what was going on very soon anyway. Sillen brought it into his room, and the images on the microcomputer swiftly changed as his fingers moved. What would York think if he knew that Sillen was hacking into the planetary network with such familiarity? Everyone's jaws would probably drop to the ground in shock, wouldn't they? After all, their understanding of Sillen was limited to the fact that he was Guan Feng's disciple and that he was quite strong. Sillen observed the coastal areas of the continent for a while before hacking into the border guard's internal network and obtaining a report. The report recorded the detailed situation of the defensive battle this time. The sea beasts of all levels were recorded, how many appeared, how many were killed, and the damage to the local cities. However, Sillen fell into deep thought when he saw a red dot on the map. These red dots were the places where the Sea King level sea beasts appeared. According to the report, the Sea King level sea beast had moved closer to the mainland and destroyed several layers of the border defense line compared to the last time the Sea King level sea beasts appeared on a large scale. I still feel like something's wrong. What is it? Sillen heard the Sea King's roar in one of the videos. Even though it was only an audio transmission, it was enough to make one's heart jump, let alone the border guards who were fighting against the sea beasts. The blue fog blocked the view, so he could only get a general idea of the human side's losses. How many warships and armored tanks were destroyed, how many fighters and aircrafts were lost. That was all. The thick fog blocked the terrible battle scene, and it was only after the fog cleared that it would reveal the fierce battle situation. Sillen tapped his fingers on the table. Sillen was familiar with the coastal defense line, the fortress-like buildings, and the weapons inside. However, logically speaking, the Sea Kings shouldn't have been able to penetrate so deep into the city in just 2 days. Were the Sea Kings really that powerful? Huimao jumped into Sillen's room while he was thinking. Judging from its raised tail, things seemed to be going well. "Are you full?" Sillen asked. "Yes." Huimao was in a good mood. He squinted his eyes and said. Huimao jumped onto the table in front of Sillen and spat out a palm-sized dark blue object. "What is this?" Sillen looked at Huimao. This was Sillen's room. There was only Sillen and Huimao here. There was no one else, so Huimao didn't beat around the bush. "I'm not sure. It should be the functional skin you guys are talking about, right? I took a bite on that big guy. Its skin is quite thick, and the outer layer doesn't have ion exchange properties. That's why I bit a little deeper. See if it's the functional skin," Huimao said. Sillen only needed to touch the piece of skin that Huimao brought over with his hand to get the information he wanted. It's indeed a functional skin. There is a special exchange layer in the middle, which can absorb metal ions. But is that all you got this time? Huimao wagged his tail proudly and opened his mouth to the size of a water tank. He spat out pieces of dark blue skin one after another. Each piece could be used as a mattress. I bit all parts of that guy's body, but I didn't know which piece belongs to which part. You can do it yourself. Did you eat a Sea King beast? Sillen asked suspiciously. Huimao smacked his lips and said, I didn't eat one, but it was not Luda's hands. I was afraid that the human army would find it strange if I attacked a Sea King beast on the land, so I went into the sea to catch one. I didn't finish it, so I ate the delicious parts. Those guys were crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. The skin was delicious, but the meat inside was not so good. The burnt skin was better. Serene nodded. As expected, this guy could eat anything, and he even had a stomach whose limits were unknown. Huimao spat out several pieces of Sea King beast skin. Silin also analyzed them one by one. In such a short time, Silin had gotten a lot of useful data, which might even be more than the data of Sea King beasts in the hands of the nobles. Sea King beasts rarely appeared on the mainland. Few Sea King beasts were caught by human beings. Even if they were caught, they would die by self-destruction. At that time, the samples of Sea King beasts would not be of much value. In contrast, the samples that Huimao gave to Silin were fresh, and the value of the data was much higher than that of those Sea King beasts that were dying. Suddenly, Silin noticed that Huimao's face twisted. "What's wrong?" Silin asked. "No, nothing." Ow. Huimao spat out an egg that was half the size of a human. There was a layer of dark blue keratin on the egg. Compared to normal eggs, the surface of this egg was not smooth. After spitting out the egg, Huimao looked better. He licked his paws and said, "It's nothing. I just ate too much." Silin, after picking up Huimao and making sure that Huimao was fine, Silin said, "Don't eat if you can't eat." "Why did you eat so much?" "I can still eat, but these eggs are not easy to digest. I ate too many this time. I'll spit this egg out first. I'll eat it when I'm hungry," Huimao said casually. Silin did not continue to worry about Huimao's appetite. He looked around the egg and put his finger on it to feel the information it contained. "Hey, it's still alive," Silin exclaimed. "Of course, I won't eat those rotten eggs." Huimao continued to lick his paws. "In other words, the one you caught was a female." Silin paused for a moment. "No, they're hermaphrodites." You killed a pregnant Sea King." Wheeze's licking slowed down a little when he mentioned this. "I noticed something when I was dealing with the Sea King." "What is it?" "The eggs were wrapped at the base of the tail. There was a very thick protective layer covering the eggs. However, when I fished out the eggs and ate them, I realized that the size and shape of the eggs were different. Even the genetic material was different. They were completely different species. From the layer of material covering the eggs, they looked similar. However, after biting a few, I realized that they belonged to different species." Huimao transferred the information to Silin's microcomputer for Silin to analyze. If the egg was crushed, it would be digested quickly. It was better to keep the egg whole for a longer period of time. Silin was puzzled as he stared at the information and the genetic data inside the eggs Wheeze had bitten into pieces. "It's a Sea King. Why would it steal the eggs of other species?" "I don't know about that." "Wait." Huimao stopped licking his paws. His body trembled. "What are you doing?" Silin asked. "I crushed another 2 eggs that didn't have time to digest." Silin, he did not expect that. Huimao transferred the information to Silin's microcomputer. This time, one of the eggs was related to the Sea King that Huimao killed. However, the other one was not. It belonged to another species. It was different from the 2 species that Huimao had given to Silin. "That's strange." Silin looked at the microcomputer and pondered. Huimao ignored him. He looked at the egg that was spat out and was about to swallow it. However, Silin stopped him. "Keep this first." Once he finished speaking, Silin took out a big box and put the egg inside. "All right." Huimao did not mind. He was not hungry anyway. Eating too much would be a waste of nutrients. He licked his fur and jumped onto Silin's shoulder to sleep. Sleep after eating. That was the truth. Silin thinks that after a long time, he still could not figure out what was going on. He stopped thinking about it and started searching for information on the internet. In the process of searching, Silin sneaked into many research institutes on different planets. Although he obtained a lot of information, most of it could not solve Silin's doubts. However, when Silin was sweeping through the network of the coastal war zone, an inconspicuous corner attracted Silin's attention. That place was also under the attack of the sea beasts. The battle was also very intense. However, in this small corner, there were no scanners, no military communication, no tactical discussions, and no exotic beast roars. Although the battle had stopped a little, it should still be a scene of devastation. It was impossible for the residents to stay there and be in the mood to go online, right? Sillin hacked in to take a look. Because of the war, the conditions there were limited. He could not get the images and audio for the time being. He could only know what the owner of the microcomputer was recording. The documents that popped up made Sillin's eyes light up. They were all about the Sea King beasts, and the analysis was much more thorough than the research groups under the minor nobles. Sillin read through the man's old records and learned that there was a time when sea beasts tried to sneak into the mainland through underground tunnels. Their movements were too loud, and they were discovered very quickly. Digging a tunnel from the ocean was definitely a thankless task, and there were plenty of sea beasts that were killed immediately after they were discovered. That was why the sea beasts no longer attempted such a thing after that. Then there was a document that recorded the changes in the number of Sea King beasts in the past 500 years. It also pointed out the most important point. No Sea King cub was found. In the war between humans and beasts 1,000 years ago, even if the Sea King cub did not follow the humans to attack the land, it would still appear on the sea surface. In the Misty area, people had once found a Sea King cub emerging. However, in recent years, no Sea King cub had been found. The minor nobles and his ruling government attributed this to the results of the war. After the war, the sea beasts were greatly weakened. For the Sea King beasts, their birth rate, which was not high to begin with, was even lower. Some of the research groups under the minor nobles even said that the sea beasts had fallen into a dead end. Without the replenishment of new blood, the Sea King beasts would one day become extinct on this planet. At that time, the report received a lot of support, and it also aroused the response of the people of the entire planet. People were very happy and looked forward to the end of the Sea King beasts. However, this person expressed doubts. Although there was no clear evidence, he analyzed many signs and even analyzed the character of the Sea King beasts. The character of the Sea King beasts? What kind of character did these sea beasts have? At that time, after this person put forward his views, the academic circle of the planet had already opposed it, especially the suppression of the minor nobles' research groups. This person's words would undoubtedly affect the good image that the minor nobles had just created. One could imagine the situation this person was in. If this person was not lucky and always active in the coastal area, he might have been killed long ago. Sillin agreed with this person in a certain aspect. Did the sea beasts not have character? Did the sea beasts not have strict thinking and high intelligence? It was hard to say. Sillin thinks back to the rad extermination mission he participated in at Seven Lights. Those black mice had set up a great conspiracy. Then, what kind of conspiracy did these sea beasts have? Chapter 252. Right now, inside a certain building in the coastal city area, a man with white hair and a thin face was busily working in front of his equipment. He was analyzing every piece of data and running probabilities. It was obvious that this man had gone through rigorous calculations before making any predictions. However, this busy man didn't know that someone in the central continent was watching his calculations and speculations. Every step of his calculations and conclusions was clearly known to the person in front of the central continent's microcomputer. Sillin looked at the map of the main combatants in the coastal city area. Most of the places were where the Sea Kings were. Fortunately, the place where this man was doing statistical analysis had just escaped a disaster, so he wouldn't be in danger for the time being. He wouldn't know if this went on for too long, though. After all, the sea beasts would have to return once the fog cleared, and the damage they'd wreak on the city could be seen from the images of previous battles. Sillin felt that this man would be of great help. Even if some of the data wasn't accurate, the general line of analysis was extremely reliable. At the very least, he was much more trustworthy than the small nobles research group. After thinking for a moment, Sillin sent over 2 copies of the skin data he'd just obtained. Stappen, who was busy with his work, was startled by the 2 data tables that suddenly popped up on his screen. However, his attention was immediately attracted by the 2 tables, and he immediately deleted the few conclusions he'd reached earlier, like he'd been injected with chicken blood. Then, he substituted the data in the 2 tables Sillin had sent him and performed a precise analysis. However, Stappen also ran into a problem when he was substituting the new data. He was stuck in deep thought, and Sillin helped him solve the problem. Just like that, two people from different parts of the continent were working together through this network. Sillin had already disguised himself, so even if someone like York, who had hacked into the network to steal information, he wouldn't be able to discover that Sillin and Stappen were working together. Right now, Stappen was extremely excited. He'd been fighting and persevering alone for so many years. The rejection, and oppression he'd suffered for the past few decades had left him depressed, but he'd persisted because of the last bit of determination he had for his home. Sillin's help was undoubtedly a shot in the arm that filled Stappen with motivation. On this planet, he was not alone in this battle. Stappen didn't care about the background of this mysterious and unknown person, nor did he care how this person obtained the precise information about these Sea Kings. All he knew was that this information would be a great boost to his analysis. Through Sillin and Stappen's collaborative analysis, they came to a few conclusions. First, it was impossible for a tyrant of the sea like the Sea King to experience reproductive failure. Therefore, it was absolutely wrong to say that the Sea King couldn't reproduce. Second, based on the case study Stappen had collected and his analysis of the Sea King's living habits, this big guy had both brains and brawn, and wasn't an idiot who only knew how to charge forward blindly. Third, Stappen had come up with a probability graph for the answer. Since they were the kings of the sea, they naturally had to think much further than the other sea beasts. They considered the future of a large race and saw long-term goals. That was why they were qualified to be called kings. Who are you? Stappen keyed in these words on the screen. Right now, they could only converse through text. Stappen's current condition didn't allow him to transmit audio or video at all, and some of the equipment on the battlefield was too damaged. Also, wouldn't it be a lot safer if it was just text? Audio and video were too easy to discover. Sillin stared at the line of words that appeared on the microcomputer screen. He moved his fingers and typed a few words. Is it important? Stappen also knew that his network had been hacked, but he wasn't angry. Instead, he sent it with the intention of making friends. He was grateful to the person who had lent him a helping hand. Since the other party wasn't willing to reveal anything, Stappen didn't force the issue. He thought that the other party must be afraid of being discovered by that noble. If they were discovered, both of them would suffer greatly, and even their lives would be in question. Under Sillin's cover, Stappen anonymously sent the conclusion of his analysis to the planetary government. However, the planetary government flew into a rage when they saw it. Someone actually dared to make a statement that would destroy the peace of the planet. What impudence! If the public were to learn of the views expressed in this document, there was no telling how much panic it would cause. Therefore, the planetary government suppressed it immediately. Even when they tried to trace the source of this electronic document, they couldn't find anything. The planetary government's reaction was undoubtedly a heavy blow to Stappen. As expected, they still didn't believe him. Since they didn't believe him, Stappen decided to search for the answer himself. He wasn't a person who could think deeply, and he wasn't a person who was good at figuring things out. Therefore, all of his analysis conclusions were based on calculations. According to probability analysis, the conclusion he was looking for was somewhere along the coast. The planetary government doesn't believe me. I'm going to search for the answer. If I don't return, I hope that you can send me this incomplete analysis. This is my final request. Stappen typed this line on the screen. He knew that the other party had the ability to hide. This was also his last hope. After typing this line, Stappen packed up his tools and prepared to search for the answer in the calculated area. Sillin frowned as he stared at the words on the screen. He could imagine that the person on the other side was just as weak as the RAS academicians. People like that would be cannon fodder among cannon fodder if they went to the battlefield. They would either be trampled by sea beasts or blasted to smithereens by indiscriminate cannon fire. How the hell was he supposed to find the answer then? Sometimes, some researchers would always search for the answer hidden in the depths of danger with passion. Even if they were covered in wounds and beyond redemption, they would still charge forward with a single-minded mind. It wasn't for themselves, it wasn't for the ruler, it was for this place they called home. They were as stubborn as an idiot, an idiot who still held the innocence of a child in the midst of thorns and thorns. In today's world, where even the academic world had been polluted, there weren't many idiots like this anymore. From the information stored in Stappen's microbrain, Sillin learned that the so-called New Sea Blue Gold formula wasn't actually invented by the minor noble subordinates. It was Stappen. Stappen used to be a member of the minor nobles research team, but he was kicked out because he disagreed with the higher-ups. However, there were still people who believed in Stappen's abilities. Otherwise, how could Stappen have obtained other information about the Sea King? This was a trade. Although many people knew that Stappen had been kicked out of the research team a long time ago, the person in charge of the research team had always maintained contact with Stappen. This person didn't have much research ability, but he had a sharp nose for politics, which was why he was able to climb to such a high position. In this world, there would never be a lack of laymen leading professionals. Sillin had met the person who had always maintained secret contact with Stappen before. That person's position was also climbing higher and higher. Sillin had heard that this person's research results were numerous and impressive. Now, it seemed that all of those results were stolen from Stappen. This person had used Stappen's idiotic stubbornness in exchange for his own fame, power, and wealth. Not only did he steal Stappen's research results, he also attacked Stappen's views and suppressed them. And so, one climbed higher and higher, while the other fell further and further. "Where are we going?" Huimao asked when he saw that Sillin had put away the microbrain and was about to go on a long journey. "I'm going to find the answer. Don't you want to see what those Sea Kings are plotting?" Huimao flicked its tail. It was obviously not in the mood to do so. It had just eaten its fill and wasn't in the mood to do so. That being said, it didn't want to stay here alone to incubate its eggs after seeing that Sillin had left. Sillin left after saying goodbye to the person in charge of the RAS. Guanfeng must have mentioned this to the person in charge before, so the person in charge quickly agreed to Sillin's request. There were others who wanted to leave as well, but they were all turned down without hesitation. This was the difference between different mentors. What Sillin took out was a hoverboard he had borrowed from Guanfeng. The front end of the hoverboard was equipped with a space-braking device that increased the hoverboard's speed by a lot. It wasn't a good idea to fly at this speed through the fog when the scanning equipment wasn't working, but that was only true for other people. Sillin had the best navigation device in the world, the Gray Cat. This cat was much more useful than other devices, and it had all the necessary functions. The fog grew thicker and thicker as they flew from the central region to the coast. Although Sillin could withstand the toxins in the fog, he put on a protective mask so that he wouldn't look like an outsider. Right now, everyone was on guard against sea beasts, so they didn't pay too much attention to humans flying in the sky, even if they were detected by the scanning equipment. As they approached the war zone, the security in the sky grew noticeably tighter. Although they were fighting against sea beasts, it wasn't like there were no sea beasts that could fly back. Therefore, they had to keep a tight watch on the sky as well. Huimao activated the scanning equipment of the defense forces, but they couldn't detect them. Right now, Sillin was flying toward the close combat zone under the cover of the blue fog. He could hear the roars of sea beasts amidst the sound of cannon fire, but he didn't see a Sea King. This wasn't the war zone yet. The sea beasts that were crawling on the residential buildings were killed by the local residents who hadn't evacuated yet. Red and blue blood could be seen everywhere. On the ground, on the buildings, on the bodies of sea beasts and humans, on the fighter jets and armored vehicles. There was red blood of humans and blue blood of sea beasts. Yes, the blood of the sea beasts here was slightly blue. Although there were different shades of blue, blue was the main color. Sillin pulled the hoverboard upward. This wasn't his destination, so there was no need to waste time here. The sea beasts that had been flying happened to be flying towards Sillin. Although they weren't pure flying birds and could only fly at low altitudes for a short period of time, their attack power was not to be underestimated. Sillin cut the sea beast in half with one slash, but the hoverboard didn't slow down at all. As he flew higher, the number of flying sea beasts he encountered was much better. He wouldn't encounter a single one for a long time. After passing through this area, Sillin heard a roar coming from afar. He knew that he had arrived at the war zone. The war zone was much more intense. There were sea beasts everywhere, and there were many large fortress-like buildings equipped with countless cannons and gun barrels. The guards rarely used stimulation-type weapons, but if they did, they had to kill in one shot. Moreover, they had to constantly change their location because the stimulation-type weapons would attract the sea beasts and expose themselves. When Scylla was flying close to the surface, he saw a type of sea beast with a big mouth. They were able to resist the high-voltage electricity released by an armored car, and their thick, bony skin was able to resist the cleavers and pincers on the armored car. Moreover, they were smart enough to stick themselves in places where the cannons couldn't reach, and their sharp teeth could leave scratches on the armored car. If an armored car encountered such a sea beast and couldn't escape within a minute, then the armored car would be scrapped, and the people inside would die for sure. The armored vehicle that Scylla encountered was undoubtedly in trouble. Two sea beasts with big mouths blocked the armored vehicle, one in front and one in the back. The sharp teeth in their big mouths scraped off the thick deck layer by layer. As Scylla flew past the armored vehicle, he slashed at the two sea beasts that were blocking the armored vehicle. After he was done, Scylla looked at the blade in his hand and noticed that there wasn't a single trace of blood on it. His blade had sliced through the big-mouthed sea monster's skin and bones, and the cleaver on the armored car looked like a pile of shit compared to it. The longer he used this blade, the more curious Scylla became. How did Esquello get his hands on a blade like this? After the armored vehicle was freed from the obstruction of the sea beasts, it quickly adjusted its cannons so that the sea beasts behind it couldn't find an opening to evade the cannons in a short period of time. The few sea beasts that were running toward them were killed. "I think someone just flew past US, a soldier said. F***CK, who cares? Just focus on fighting the sea beasts." Another person shouted. The closer they got to the Sea Kings, the more large sea beasts Scylla could see. The armored vehicles here were also stronger. It was like a game between giants. The sea beasts didn't even flinch under the continuous bombardment of the giant armored vehicles and flying warships. No one would notice that there was a tiny human flying in the middle of the battlefield. There were a few times when Scylla was almost hit by the indiscriminate bombardment. Still nothing. Scylla asked Huimao. "Nope." Huimao shook his head. The reason they were flying close to the ground was so that Huimao could better search for answers. From here onward, they would be in the area with the highest probability of an answer, as Stappen had mentioned. However, the probability of an answer in this area was relatively low. Forget it then. Let's keep flying. Scylla adjusted the hoverboard and pulled it higher. This area of the battlefield was too intense. It was the most important area of the current timeline, and it was also the area where the Sea Kings resided. The areas closer to the sea were already in ruins after the battle, so it wasn't as intense as this area. However, it was the area with the highest probability of an answer, as Stappen had mentioned. After flying past the most important area of the battlefield, Scylla saw cities that had been trampled by sea beasts and collapsed defensive lines. Of course, something like this would always happen in every major battle, and these defensive lines would be rebuilt after the battle. Huimao twitched his nose. "What is it?" Scylla asked. Right now, they were flying close to the ground. Scylla was responsible for taking care of the sea beasts blocking their way, while Huimao was responsible for scouting. "Eggs." Huimao blinked and chuckled. "It really is the smell of eggs." Chapter 253. Where? Scylla asked. "This way." Huimao jumped down and ran in a certain direction. Scylla could sense its location, so he wasn't afraid of losing it. Although this area was already in the post-war zone, there were still many sea beasts left. When they saw Scylla and Huimao, these sea beasts swarmed towards them. However, they came to an abrupt halt when they were a dozen or so meters away from Wheeze. Wheeze gave them a very dangerous feeling. These sea beasts weren't stupid, and they were quite wary of Wheeze after it tore a pouncing sea beast into pieces in an instant. However, there were still many sea beasts. Some hesitated for a moment before they were ready to pounce. However, Huimao's roar stopped them. Huimao's roar gave them the feeling of a Sea King beast. As for Scylla, because he was very close to Huimao, many sea beasts couldn't find a chance to attack Scylla. However, once Scylla was a little further away from Huimao, These sea beasts wouldn't hesitate to attack. Hui Mao wandered around the ruins, then pointed at a place and said, "It's here." Underground? Silin also smelled the smell. Although his sense of smell wasn't as good as Hui Mao's, it was far more sensitive than the average person. In addition, he smelled the smell from the egg that Hui Mao spat out. Now, Silin could smell a trace of the same smell from here. Hui Mao chose a spot and skillfully started to dig. After digging into the ground, Hui Mao's front claws became mechanized. After stretching out, he dug a hole that was big enough for Silin to enter. Following behind the gray cat, Silin took out a disc-shaped instrument and placed it at the entrance of the cave. The disc-shaped instrument expanded with a bang and covered the entire entrance of the cave. It also assimilated itself with the surrounding ruins so that it was hard to tell from the outside that a hole had been dug at the back. Silin followed behind Hui Mao with a breathing mask. Hui Mao was getting better at digging holes. He was faster than an excavator. Hui Mao dug very deep. There was still the smell of the Sea King beast around the hole. It was hard to imagine how the Sea King beast could send these eggs so deep underground. "Oh, there it is," Hui Mao shouted excitedly. Thousands of meters underground, there was a pile of eggs. Just like the eggs Weez had eaten earlier, there were all kinds of eggs, and they weren't exclusive to sea beasts. Silin placed his hand on an egg and examined it. These were all undeveloped eggs. If he broke them, it would only be a pool of sticky egg white and yolk. However, after some time, the little life inside the eggs would develop and break out of the shell. Silin had a rough idea of the Sea King's plan. What is this place? Border defense. This was the third line of defense in the coastal area. The first two lines of defense were also in ruins. At the moment, there was a battle going on at the fourth line of defense. The coastal areas of this planet did not dig deep into the ground. These eggs of different shapes and sizes were all wrapped in a layer of hard material. Just like the egg that Hui Mao spat out, it could avoid detection. As long as the scanning device did not go within 50 meters of this place, it would be difficult to detect. The metal composition that Silin analyzed from the skin samples provided by Hui Mao was inferior to the composition of the various components on the eggs. In other words, the dark blue layer of keratin-like attachment on the eggs had a better composition. However, on the other hand, the attachment on the eggs could not continue to carry out ion exchange. You can't have it both ways. This was why the composition on the Sea King's body was not as perfect as the composition on the eggs. Silin turned around and saw Hui Mao swallowing the eggs one after another. "Didn't you eat too much?" "A little, but I've digested a little. It's fine to eat this little bit. These are not as hard to digest as the egg," Hui Mao said while swallowing the eggs. "That egg is hard to digest," Silin thinks. He thought about the eggs that Hui Mao spat out in the room. Some of the eggs here looked similar to that egg. However, when Silin put his finger on these eggs, he knew that even though the outer layer was wrapped in the same attachment, the shell itself was very different. Just like the egg that Hui Mao spat out, there were only a few eggs in this large pile, no more than 10 in number. Half of the genes of those hard-to-digest eggs are the same as the Sea King, but I don't know the other half, Hui Mao said while swallowing the eggs. Silin nodded and put these eggs into the ring with curly leaf patterns. Other than their research value, they could also be used as food for Hui Mao. However, if these eggs accidentally hatched a small sea monster in the subspace, there would be no other way. There could not be creatures with strong life signals inside. If it was in the form of an egg, it would be fine, but if it was a sea monster, it would cause the subspace to lose stability and collapse. "Almost forgot that you have that thing," he. When Hui Mao saw that Silin had put away all the eggs, he smiled happily. This way, he didn't have to force himself to swallow the eggs. After cleaning up the place, Silin said, "Let's go to the next place." "Is there more?" Hui Mao's eyes lit up. These were all food. The more, the better. There should be. Since the Sea King had hidden sea monster eggs under the third line of defense, there should be at the first and second lines of defense, right? After leaving the cave, Silin and Hui Mao went to the second line of defense in this direction. Just as Silin expected, the second line of defense was also flattened into ruins. It seemed that this was done to cover up the eggs underground and clear all the obstacles around it. Sillen did not smell the eggs here, but he could use the third line of defense as a reference. Sillen and Hui Mao went deeper into the second line of defense. After searching for a while, they finally found the eggs hidden there. Strangely, there was no egg similar to the one Hui Mao spat out. Celine inspected some of the eggs. From the looks of it, these eggs had been hidden away during the Great War between humans and beasts decades ago. However, the sea beasts inside had gradually matured. It was just that they still needed some time to fully mature. He believed that these little sea beasts would break out of the soil and join the battle during the next Great War. After the beast died, the second line of defense would be rebuilt, and those eggs would be directly below the line of defense. When the next beast tide came, these eggs would hatch, and they would be able to cooperate with the sea beasts that came out of the sea. But why hadn't there been any young sea king beasts after all these years? Logically speaking, these hatched little sea monsters would join the battle. But why hadn't they heard of any young sea king beasts? If the young sea king beasts were protected in the deep sea, it would be reasonable. But these were all sea king beasts that had participated in the battle. Could it be that not everyone had seen a young sea king beast? When Sillen and Hui Mao arrived at the first line of defense, they knew the answer to this question. The first line of defense was quickly broken in the war between humans and beasts. It was incredibly fast. The heroes of breaking the first line of defense were the hatched little sea monsters hiding underground. It didn't take Sillen and Wheeze long to find the place where the egg was hidden. Wheeze had smelled the scent of an egg breaking, and some sea beast had crawled out of the hole and disappeared into the sea. They didn't head inland. There are a few that haven't hatched yet. Hui Mao walked around the eggs. A little sea monster that had just broken its shell was swallowed by Hui Mao. After swallowing it, it complained about the taste and spat a few times. As soon as Hui Mao's voice fell, an egg made a cracking sound. Looking at the little sea monster that had just broken its shell, Sillen had a strange feeling. After this little guy came out, it had a fierce look. The small spikes on its back were all erect. Its forelimbs were webbed, but they also had sharp claws. Its body was dark blue, and its surface was hard to protect. Its big mouth was full of sharp teeth. After seeing Sillen and Hui Mao, it didn't rush towards them immediately. Instead, it opened its mouth and shouted. This voice, Sea King Beast, although it sounded young, it was indeed the sound of a Sea King Beast. How could a young Sea King Beast be so different from an adult one? If it was mixed with other sea monsters, it would be really hard to distinguish it. No wonder those people couldn't find a young Sea King Beast. As the young Sea King Beast shouted, a few eggs next to it that hadn't moved before made a cracking sound, and then they all broke their shells together. There were big-mouthed sea monsters and some other sea monsters that Sillen had seen when he came over. These newly hatched sea monsters all rushed towards Sillen and Hui Mao. However, after all, they were young sea monsters, and there weren't many of them. Most of them had already left, and these little ones didn't have much attack power. Soon, they were killed by Sillen and Hui Mao. That young Sea King Beast was swallowed by Hui Mao. After swallowing it, Hui Mao squatted there and didn't move. No one knew what he was thinking. What's wrong? Sillen asked. Hui Mao flicked his tail. This little guy has all the genes of a Sea King Beast. It's different from the egg I spat out before. However, I feel that my protruding egg is more difficult to digest. Sillen pondered, but now was not the time to think about it. Let's go. We'll talk about these things later. The fog is about to disperse. Let's not run into a group of sea monsters. Let's go back to the sea. Sillen and Hui Mao avoided a large number of sea monsters when they flew inland. When they returned to the residence of the RAS, the place was already under martial law. All the windows of the buildings had been opened, and they were no longer tightly shut. Several people from the RAS were discussing how to continue negotiating with the minor nobles. They were discussing whether to take tough measures. However, because tough measures would damage the reputation of the RAS, they didn't want to take such measures until the last moment. After all, the RAS still maintained a good image. When Sillen came back, He didn't communicate with the others. He went straight into his room and didn't come out, saying that he wanted a rest. After entering the room, Hui Mao made an analysis of the little sea king beast he swallowed. From the analysis, Silin found that there was a hollow cartilage on the tail of the sea king beast. The cartilage was usually flat and curled, but when stretched, its length was dozens of times longer than the overall height of the sea king beast. Although it was cartilage, it was speculated that the adult sea king beast could harden the cartilage in a short time. The hardened cartilage penetrated deep into the ground and then sent the egg into a deep hole. The appendages wrapped around the various sea beast eggs belonged to the sea king beast. Those sea beast eggs hidden underground, even if the form inside the egg had been fully formed, would be in a state of hibernation before the attack of the sea beasts. When the sea beasts attacked, the sea king beast cry would wake them up from their hibernation. After hatching, the baby sea king beast would not immediately come out of the ground. They would feed on other sea beast eggs until the adult sea king beast called them. Only then would these little guys break out of the ground with other hatched sea beasts. Therefore, the adult sea king beast would estimate the time it would take for the eggs to grow and use that time to attack the land. The sea beasts that lived at the top of the food chain, especially the oviparous ones, were all within the sea king's consideration. The sea king beast would select a portion of its eggs, then wrap each egg with a layer of appendages, and secretly hide these eggs underground when it attacked the land. The first time the sea king beast did this, no one noticed it, so it did the same thing the next 2 times. The first line of defense was broken, and the sea king beast had tasted the sweetness of victory. However, if it wasn't for Silin discovering the hidden eggs this time, the humans on the planet would have suffered a lot in the next few decades. Silin had only dug out the eggs in one direction, and there were still eggs buried under the other lines of defense on the continent. However, Silin didn't have the time to dig them all out. Silin searched for Stappen through the internet again. Stappen's location had changed. He had probably found some information this time, and was continuing to analyze it. Stappen's analysis narrowed down the search area by a lot, and Silin discovered that the 3 places where the eggs were hidden were all within Stappen's boundaries. It wasn't just a single place, it was an analysis of the entire continent. It was hard to imagine that a person could come up with a result just based on data alone. If it wasn't for Stappen's analysis, Silin wouldn't have been able to find these places so quickly. Silin didn't tell Stappen the answer he had found. Now, it wasn't the time to talk about this. After a brief conversation with Stappen, Silin contacted Guanfeng and told him about his findings. Guanfeng would discuss the rest of the details with the people of the RAS. After all, they didn't think that Silin was qualified to speak to the academicians directly. In the following days, the people of the RAS didn't bother with a minor noble and his planetary government. After the RAS's reinforcements arrived, they started cleaning up the other places where the sea beast eggs were hidden. "You've done a great service this time, Silin. You made me proud." Guanfeng was smiling so happily that his fox eyes were narrowed into slits. Guanfeng didn't think that Silin would not only find a better mixture of sea blue gold, but also eliminate the huge hidden danger there. Those old geezers didn't make any progress no matter how much they tried, but Silin managed to get his hands on a couple of recipes without a word. This also made Guanfeng feel better. "Not bad. You're worthy of praise." Guanfeng looked like he was in a pretty good mood. Guanfeng might have a lot of say in the RAS, but he wasn't the only one. Now that Silin had gotten his hands on the other recipes for sea blue gold, Guanfeng's influence had grown as well. The BIS project team owed Guanfeng a huge favor. Of course, they would stand on Guanfeng's side when it came to important decisions. "You'll get your reward. Just tell me if you need anything. Just tell me if you have any other requests," Guanfeng said. "Can I ask for anything?" Silin asked. "Yes, as long as it's within my capabilities. If that's the case, I heard that even an academician of your rank has the right to recommend someone to become an honorary scholar." Guanfeng raised an eyebrow. "That's right. Do you want to join?" "Not really. I want to recommend someone." Silin told Guanfeng about Stappen. Guanfeng waved his hand and gave his approval. "I'll let your team leader know. Come back with me when you find Stappen. I'll take care of the rest." "All right." With Guanfeng around, Sillin didn't have to do too many troublesome things. After receiving Guan Feng's promise, Sillin contacted Stappen through the network. Although the fact that the RAS had found sea beast eggs near the border hadn't spread, Stappen must have heard about it from the minor and noble research groups. Right now, Stappen really wanted to meet Sillin and share his joy with him. This incident had proven his point of view to be correct. Although the public didn't agree with him, Stappen was happy to have a supporter. When Sillin saw Stappen, the latter looked like he was in dire straits. Although Stappen had done his best to tidy himself up, his broken leg and white hair only made him look even more dispirited. It was obvious that Stappen's broken leg had only recently been severed. Right now, he was only supported by a simple mechanical leg. Stappen couldn't afford any treatment at his current dire condition. Stappen was also surprised to see Sillin. He didn't think that he would meet such a young person. In Stappen's imagination, this person who could discuss and analyze data with him should be a middle-aged researcher at the very least, right? But the reality was that he was a young man in his early 20s. The duo found a quiet place to talk. Sillin didn't want anyone to hear their conversation, but it didn't matter if they did. It wouldn't change the outcome. After talking about the Sea King for a while, Sillin explained the purpose of his visit. Honorary scholar. Stappen couldn't help but exclaim loudly when he heard Sillin's words. Who wouldn't want to go to the highest temple of academic researchers? Even in their dreams. It was Stappen's dream when he was young, but he had suppressed it after experiencing so many things. It was an extravagant hope that could never be achieved. But now, Sillin was saying that he could give him such a chance. How could Stappen not be excited? Stappen didn't lack ability to live to this day. The only thing he lacked was an opportunity. However, the god of luck never seemed to like him. He was always suppressed and abandoned step by step. Every time Stappen lay exhausted in his simple and crude workshop, he would always think that if he was given a chance, even if it was just a small chance, he would definitely prove himself. He would prove that he was right, that what he was doing was the right thing. The minor noble didn't give him this chance. The research organization didn't give him this chance. But Sillin did. The minor noble would definitely be quite unwilling to bring Stappen to the RAS after learning the truth. But could the minor noble not let him go? Did he dare not? He didn't dare. The RAS wanted him, and Stappen himself had agreed to it. A minor noble like him didn't have any bargaining chips in his hands right now. He couldn't shake the RAS at all. Not only did the minor noble not make things difficult for Stappen after he realized this, he even smiled at him. After all, he came from this planet, from his fief. This was his home. He would still rely on Stappen's analysis and support for the war against the sea beasts in the future. After everything was taken care of, everyone prepared to return to the capital star region. However, the day before they were about to leave, 2 academicians were kidnapped while they were out scouting. Of the guards who protected them, 3 were killed and 10 were injured. 2 of them, who were transferred from the affiliated schools like Sillin, were heavily injured. The people of the RAS were furious, and the minor noble couldn't sleep at all. Kidnapping someone from the RAS on his own turf. It was going to be hard for him to get out of this mess. He had just finished the war against the sea beasts, only to run into this mess again. The minor noble was about to lose all his hair. The naval equipment on the planet was pretty good, but the equipment in other areas wasn't. There was no surveillance footage, so it was obvious that the kidnappers had come prepared. Moreover, they weren't residents of this planet. The person who could injure the guard without making a sound couldn't be weak either. Their plan was very thorough. Not long after the 2 academicians went missing, they received a message. Who would have thought that the kidnappers were after the sea blue gold? Normally, the best sea blue gold recipe wasn't made public, and the ones that were made public weren't the best ones. However, the RAS had obtained more than one recipe this time, and all of them were very high level. It would probably take at least 3 to 5 years for them to be made public. Not to mention that there was a super recipe that was known as the perfect sea blue gold. Sea blue gold had a wide range of uses, and different ratios had different functions. The fact that Guan Feng needed sea blue gold to develop the Purgatory Thunder Snake S proved how valuable it was. Every high-level C blue gold recipe would sell for an astronomical price on the black market. It wasn't strange that someone was after it. What was strange was that the kidnappers had gone against the RAS directly. Was it the work of a certain noble or the rioters? For now, there was no conclusion. The planet was quickly locked down after the 2 academicians went missing. Even the surrounding planets were mobilized to guard the place. The Mist Bodhisattva royal family also sent people to investigate. There weren't many people who knew about the true sea blue gold recipe. When Sillin gave a recipe to Guanfeng, the latter must have communicated with a few important people in the RAS. Therefore, the only people who knew about the recipe were Sillin, Guanfeng, the project manager of the Abyss, and a few leaders of the RAS. Everyone else, including the 2 kidnapped academicians, didn't know about it. However, the 2 of them were important figures in the Abyss project, so they couldn't be ignored. The RAS was doing their best to find them. The Mist Bodhisattva Emperor had decreed that the sea blue gold recipe must not be leaked. There were a lot of rioters in the Empire. If they learned about the latest sea blue gold recipe, it would undoubtedly bring a lot of trouble to the Empire. Although some things weren't stated openly, Sillin could guess a few things. After all, the Empire spanned more than 20 star regions. How could it possibly be a united front? The poisonous insects hiding in the shadows would come out and wreak havoc whenever they had the chance. Guanfeng wouldn't tell anyone who knew the recipe, and the person in charge of the Abyss project was backed by the royal family. That being said, Sillin was a different story since he was a native of the imperial capital. The RAS didn't dare do anything to Guanfeng because he was his backer. All they could do was guard him closely. Sillin was trapped inside a building like he was in a prison cell. To put it nicely, he was being protected. Right now, it was rumored that Sillin had leaked information about the sea blue gold recipe. There were a lot of people who disliked Sillin, and a lot of people who were jealous of him. There were definitely a lot of people who wanted to smear Sillin's name. Although a lot of people didn't believe it, the rumor didn't change the fact that Sillin was under heavy surveillance. There were even more people who disliked Guanfeng. However, although Sillin was Guanfeng's student and Sillin was rumored to have leaked the recipe, no one dared to say that Guanfeng had anything to do with it. Those who did were killed in secret. Who was Guanfeng? He was the emperor's tutor, and even the current Mist Bodhisattva emperor would defend him. Why would someone as experienced as Guanfeng do something so stupid? Therefore, anyone who wronged Guanfeng was seen as malicious slander, and slandering the emperor's tutor no less. Therefore, those who wanted to but didn't dare to smear Guanfeng's name directly targeted Sillin. The rumors against Sillin grew more and more numerous. In order to prevent the kidnappers from escaping, no one was allowed to leave the area. Therefore, the reinforcements didn't leave to prevent the kidnappers from escaping. If anyone tried to leave by force, they would definitely be attacked as kidnappers. Therefore, Guanfeng's original plan to send Sillin back to the capital was rejected by the higher-ups just to be safe. Now, Sillin could only be guarded by layers of guards in a room that was 100 square meters in size. He wanted nothing more than to eat, drink, and go to the bathroom. Sillin wasn't allowed to touch the internet, and his communicator was confiscated. Huimao and Sillin were locked up together. It couldn't let Sillin eat the eggs even if someone was watching over it. All day long, it lay in Sillin's arms, waiting to be pacified. Although Guanfeng couldn't revoke Sillin's guardianship order, he did a lot of work. One day, Sillin woke up and saw his senior brother, Pastura, and senior sister, Fuqingqing. Pastura's presence meant that the Imperial Guard sent to assist in the investigation would show him some respect. Fuqingqing's presence meant that the Imperial Guard sent to assist in the investigation would be more careful as well. As for Goryo, Pastura said that the kid was still on his way here. Everyone Sillin came into contact with was under surveillance, not even Pastura or Fuqingqing. That being said, they could achieve their goal even if they didn't say a word. After all, they were here to hold the fort. Guanfeng couldn't come. He was one of the few insiders, so he stayed at the RAS with a few others. That was why he sent Pastura, Fuqingqing, and Goryo to back up Sillin. His disciple wasn't someone anyone could bully. Even if he was confined to 100 square meters or so, The person in charge of the guards had to treat him with respect. Silin was very grateful for Guanfeng's help, but there was another person besides Guanfeng who had come over. Jin Xingqian and his men showed up the second day after Pastura and Fu Qingqing arrived. It looked like they were here to back up Silin as well. Chapter 254. A lot of people could understand why Pastura, Fu Qingqing, and the others had come over. They were brothers and disciples of Guanfeng after all. But why did the Jin family come over? Jin Xingqian was the next successor to King Fuji's throne. Right now, Jin Xingqian's every action represented the entire Jin family, and the current King Fuji was slowly ceding power to Silin. Therefore, Jin Xingqian's arrival silenced a lot of people while they were still gossiping about Guanfeng and Silin's wrongdoings and making wild guesses about Silin and Guanfeng. They could talk about the royal family in their hearts, but they couldn't say it out loud. At the same time, many people's attention had shifted from the sea blue gold leak to Silin. The previous King Fuji, Jin Xingqian's grandfather, Jin Liao, wasn't a good-tempered man. It was an open secret among the upper echelons that Jin Liao and Guanfeng didn't share a good relationship. Many people knew that Jin Xingyao, Jin Xingming, and the others had suffered a lot at Guanfeng's hands when they were still in the affiliated schools. Guanfeng would more or less feed them more or less. After all, Guanfeng's influence in the affiliated schools was pretty big, and his identity as a royal prince wasn't going to give Jin Xingming and the others any advantage. It seemed that no one with the word Jin in their name or anyone with a Jin family tag in their name had ever fared well in Guanfeng's hands. Among the students Guanfeng had personally taught over the years, the Jin family was the only one that didn't have a student of Guanfeng's. Moreover, Guanfeng wouldn't show up where Jin Liao was, and Jin Liao wouldn't go where Guanfeng was. Even if the two of them had to go together, they would treat each other like complete strangers. There was no sense of politeness between them at all. It was as if looking at each other for an extra moment would hurt their eyes. Who would have thought that both sides would show up for a greenhorn like Silin at the same time? It was good enough that the Jin family didn't slander Silin after what happened to Guanfeng's student. Why would they show up to support Silin? Unfortunately, he was here to hold the fort. The Imperial Guard and the Joint Garrison Army's eyeballs nearly popped out of their sockets when they saw Jin Xingqian talking to Silin in a friendly manner. Jin Xingyao and Jin Xingming didn't come with him this time. Jin Xingqian was the only one who came with the Jin family. Inside the room, Silin, Pastura, Fu Qingqing, Goryeo, and Jin Xingqian were sitting around a table. Jin Xingqian didn't make things difficult for Pastura and the others. His attitude was neither warm nor cold, but he was smiling at Silin. Through his conversation with them, Silin learned the reason why they were guarded so strictly. At first, they thought that sea blue gold wouldn't be too important even if it was an upgrade recipe, but things seemed to have escalated when Silin handed over the latest recipes. Moreover, the higher-ups were definitely hiding something important from them. Pastura and the others' expressions told them that they must know something, but they weren't allowed to talk about it carelessly. After all, they were under surveillance right now. Their conversation would be monitored, so Jin Xingqian didn't reveal his secrets to Silin. However, he did drop a bomb on him. After this is over, my grandfather wants to see you. He originally wanted to come over immediately, but the current situation is a little complicated, so he can only wait for this matter to pass. Everyone's first reaction was bullshit. Their second reaction was, how is that possible? Their third reaction was, Silin is a member of the Jin family. Pastura shot Silin a glance. He was sure that Guanfeng knew about Silin's background, and there was no way he would accept a student who was related to the Jin family. He didn't know the truth, but he believed that his teacher must have his reasons. Jin Xingqian's words weren't just for Silin. They were for the other eavesdroppers as well. How dare you not treat someone that the previous King Fuji wants to protect? Goryeo and Fu Qingqing exchanged a glance with each other. It looks like Silin wouldn't have suffered any grievances even if they hadn't shown up. Our little junior brother, sure, hid his strength well. The previous King Fuji's visit to Silin was within Silin's expectations. He already had this speculation after meeting Jin Xingqian. Is this finally going to end after so many years? After the group left, Silin went back to his bedroom and leaned against a chair to read a book. Hui Mao crouched on top of the egg he had spat out earlier. He had been very bored lately, but he didn't have much of an appetite. The eggs he had eaten a few days ago were enough to last him for a while. However, he was annoyed at being locked up in a crappy place like this, so Silin tossed the egg to Hui Mao to play with. He could eat it if he got tired of playing with it. The surface of the egg wasn't smooth, so Hui Mao was able to scratch himself on it. That was why the egg had become Hui Mao's favorite pastime. Every time he saw Hui Mao dozing off on top of the egg, Silin felt like he was a cat sitting on top of an egg, even though the ratio between the two was very different right now. Since there were a lot of people supporting him, Silin had fewer restrictions on his movements inside the building. However, the outer layer of the building was still heavily guarded. Silin had a feeling that this lineup wasn't just because they were afraid that Silin would leak the recipe. It was more like they were guarding Silin himself. Was he being watched by someone? Silin had always trusted his instincts. He had a feeling that there was a pair of eyes watching him from the shadows, waiting to strike when he was caught off guard. This person must have something to do with the decision made by the higher-ups and the information Pastura and the others couldn't reveal. Silin didn't understand why he was being targeted by someone. He might be Guan Feng's student, but he shouldn't have the right to receive such treatment. Should he? That was why Silin asked his question when Goryo came to visit him the next day. Am I being watched by someone? Goryo was surprised by Silin's question for a moment before smiling helplessly. I knew I couldn't hide it from you. He let out a long sigh before asking. You're the one who discovered it, aren't you? Silin knew that Goryo was referring to the sea blue gold recipes, so he nodded. That's right. Even if I can't get my hands on it, it's still possible to get you there. Silin frowned. Wasn't this a little too arrogant? Wasn't this openly opposing the Empire? Not to mention opposing the RAS. No, there were people who didn't care about opposing the nobles and the RAS. Not every new technology was under the control of the RAS. There were always people who didn't want to join the RAS or work for the nobles. Instead, they formed their own organization and scattered themselves all over the Empire. They were also the biggest headache the Empire had been unable to clean out for a very long time. Black Viper. Black Viper was the biggest dark force in the Empire. It had existed for a very long time, and every mist Bodhisattva emperor would do his best to clean out Black Viper's organizations, but to little avail. Every time Black Viper's forces were wiped out on a large scale, some nobles would always be dragged into the mix. That was the biggest headache. They obeyed the orders of the nobles, but some of them were willing to fall into their trap. The people of Black Viper were always unscrupulous. They could turn a prosperous planet into a dead one, sell drugs or bacteria that the Empire strictly prohibited, and they would never be caught. Silin hadn't fought against Black Viper before, but his 3 senior brothers and sisters had. That was why Pastura and the other 2 weren't just here to support Silin. They were here to protect Silin as well. After all, it was better to trust one's own people more. Goryo glanced at Silin's expression and guessed that the young man understood what he was going to say. He patted Silin's shoulder and said, Don't worry, we're all here. Silin rolled his eyes at him. I'm not afraid. Wait for 5 more days. If we can't find those people by then, we'll take you back to the imperial capital. Before leaving, Goryo shot a glance at Hui Mao, who was sleeping on top of the egg with its eyes closed. He asked Silin, Is the cat hatching the egg? Yeah. Goryo imagined Hui Mao hatching the egg and eating the newborn sea beast. It was strange no matter how he thought about it. Felines were indeed eccentric. While sending Goryo off, Silin suddenly looked outside the window as if he sensed something. What are you looking at? Goryo followed Silin's line of sight and saw only a few buildings that looked the same. They weren't very tall, and there was nothing out of the ordinary about them. Nothing, just looking at the scenery outside. It's been a long time since I last went out. You brat, it hasn't even been 10 days. Back then, Teacher Guan held a gun to my head and forced me to reflect on my mistakes for more than 20 days. You're already doing a good job. Goryo punched him with a smile. Just wait a little longer, I'm almost there. After Goryo left, Silin shot another glance in that direction before moving his gaze away. He flicked Hui Mao's ear and said, Let's go. We're going to sleep in the room. Hui Mao opened his eyes. He didn't look sleepy or lazy at all. Instead, he looked like he was suppressing some kind of excitement. He kicked the egg off the table with his paw, jumped off the table, and rolled the egg toward the resting room. Fortunately, the egg was very sturdy. A normal egg would have turned into a mess after 2 or 3 kicks. Every time Silin saw Wheeze abuse the egg, he would wonder if the final egg really hatched a sea beast. Would the sea beast suffer from congenital concussion? A pair of eyes suddenly appeared on the roof of a residential building not far from the one Silin was staying in. Its back was facing Silin. Another 4 days passed after Goryo spoke to Silin. The investigation hadn't made any progress during this time, and it was as if the 2 kidnapped scholars had vanished into thin air. "It's tomorrow, isn't it?" Hui Mao crouched on the egg and asked Silin. "Yeah." Silin looked out the window. Hui Mao wagged his tail and muttered, "Why isn't it showing up yet soon?" Pastura and the others were sitting in the building next door, but the atmosphere was very serious. The closer it was to the deadline, the more vigilant they needed to be. This was the experience they'd gained after coming into contact with Black Viper. In front of the 3 of them was a surveillance feed of Silin's room. Even Silin's room was being monitored. On the feed, Silin was talking to Hui Mao and scratching Hui Mao's chin. Jin Xingqian's room wasn't too far away from Silin's building. He was sitting on a chair and going through some documents. Even though he wasn't in the imperial capital or the Jin family's headquarters, there were still some things he needed to take care of. This was what the would-be king of Fuji had to do, and it was called government affairs. "Your Highness, Ha Turiai is here." A subordinate came in to report. Ha Turiai was one of Jin Xingqian's subordinates. Jin Xingqian had ordered him and a few others to investigate Black Viper. Ha Turiai must have returned for something important. "Let him in." Jin Xingqian didn't even look up from the document in his hand. After Ha Turiai came in, the tall, muscular man saluted Jin Xingqian respectfully and said, "Your Highness, there's news." Due to Jin Xingqian's identity, this building and its surroundings were all Jin family members. The other guards wouldn't set foot in this area. Jin Xingqian walked out of the building with Ha Turiai and a few other servants behind him. He signaled the Jin family guards to stay put and go to Silin's room. Since the deadline was approaching, the security around Silin's building had tightened. When Jin Xingqian arrived, he was the only one allowed to enter, just like the last few times. The others had to wait outside. Hatu Lei and the other 4 attendants did not have a good attitude towards the guards outside, and the guards outside also pretended not to see them. Everyone had their own masters to do their jobs, and it was none of their business if they were unhappy. This was an order from above, and we only needed to obey. When Jin Xingqian arrived at Silin's room, Silin and Hui Mao were rolling the egg around like a ball. Seeing Jin Xingqian, Silin looked up and smiled. "You're here." Hui Mao's claws left a few scratches on the egg and rubbed them together. Jin Xingqian nodded and pulled over a chair to sit down. "I received the news today, so I came to inform you, so that you can prepare." "Prepare for what?" Silin stood up and faced Jin Xingqian. "Today might not be so peaceful." "Is that so?" Silin pushed the sea beast egg to a corner and ignored Hui Mao's protests. He looked at Jin Xingqian and said, "I know it won't be peaceful either." The moment he said this, Silin's hand flashed with silver light and slashed at Jin Xingqian like a bolt of lightning. Zizzi, the smiling Jin Xingqian was cut in half, but there wasn't a single drop of blood. The part that was cut open wasn't flesh, but metal, being split in 2 after the sound of electricity. This person was a robot, not to mention that the scanners in the building hadn't detected anything at all. Pastura and the others next door saw everything that happened on Silin's side very clearly. Something's wrong. Black Viper is on the move. The 3 of them jumped out of the window at the same time and fired at almost the same time. The 5 people who came with Jin Xingqian were shot in the forehead almost at the same time, but none of them bled. Moreover, they were able to move normally and evade the attacks even after being shot. All 5 of them were robots as well. At the same time, on Jin Xingqian's side, Jin Xingqian walked up to the badly deformed robot that had been turned into a pile of scrap metal. After taking a look at it, He put away his gun and walked out while stepping on the robot's head. His subordinates were already on the move. Who would have thought that Black Viper would send robots this time? The peaceful area was instantly engulfed in the flames of war the moment the anomaly began. Robots and mechanical animals swarmed out of the surrounding buildings. Not only could Black Viper's robots avoid detection by the scanners, they could also change their forms. They weren't robots that were completely controlled by humans, but more like trained agents and assassins. One of the robots transformed into a leopard after its arm was chopped off and leaped around to avoid gunfire. Their movements were agile and difficult to lock onto. Pistura leaped past the soldiers and landed on a protruding corner of the building in a couple of jumps, firing repeatedly with a backhand. 3 shots, 3 hits. The bullets pierced the chests of 3 robots and exploded, reducing them to scrap metal. "Where's Silin?" Pistura asked the guards who came out of the building where Silin was. "I didn't see him, he's gone." "Fuck. Find him." "Yes, sir." The guards were all on high alert when they saw Jin Xingqian. They let out a sigh of relief when they learned that this was the real Jin Xingqian and not a robot. They were a little confused. These robots could change their forms and make it difficult for people to notice them. The soldiers tensed up even more when Fu Qingqing found out that some of them had hidden among the soldiers and shot arrows at them. They didn't know if the person behind them was a robot or not, and they all suspected that it was an accident. These robots were very cunning. They constantly changed their forms from robots to different people and shuttled through this group of people at an extremely fast speed. They would even collect human blood and smear it on their bodies when they turned into people to confuse their vision. Their goal is to stall us. Let's not waste our time here. Our main goal is to find Silin, Pistura said to Fu Qingqing and Goryo. All right. Fu Qingqing and Goryo decisively withdrew from the fight and left the situation to the Imperial Guards and the Allied garrison. Jin Xingqian also sent his men to find Silin. His identity didn't allow him to act as he pleased like Pistura and the others. Therefore, the only thing Jin Xingqian could do right now was to settle the situation as best as he could. The Jin family guards followed Jin Xingqian closely and didn't give the robots a chance at all. Everyone else who got too close to Jin Xingqian was treated as a suspect and executed. That was why the robots couldn't find a chance to cause trouble for Jin Xingqian. Many of the surrounding buildings were damaged and riddled with holes, but most of the residents had evacuated by the time the garrison arrived. Therefore, there weren't many innocent casualties. The robots were fully equipped, and they didn't seem to be tired at all. Laser beams and cannons clashed with each other. The laser beams arced through the air like the feet of a crab before crashing down and shaking the ground. The war zone expanded, and the nearby residents and planetary government personnel hurriedly fled the area lest they get caught in the crossfire. The flames of war were burning fiercely here, and Serene was in hot pursuit. Chapter 255. After Silin killed the fake Jin Xingqian, a person who looked exactly like the missing academician appeared not far away from Silin's window. No, it should be called a robot that had transformed into the missing academician. The robot ran away after seeing Silin kill the fake Jin Xingqian, and Silin chased after it. Silin didn't use a hoverboard. Instead, he jumped from the rooftops of the residential buildings like the robot did. There were too many restrictions in the air, and it was too chaotic. The slightest carelessness would make him a target for everyone. No matter how agile a hoverboard was, it couldn't compare to Silin himself. Therefore, it was better for Silin to use his own legs for safety's sake. The robot was very fast. Unlike humans, who had a breathing limit, it could keep running at the same speed as long as it had enough energy. Moreover, it had great jumping ability. It was able to jump from one rooftop to another without a hitch. Every jump was flawless, as if it had been made with precise calculations. The robot wasn't just fast, it was also running in tricky places. However, it didn't run toward crowded areas. Instead, it ran towards the outskirts of the city. Logically speaking, the robot could have easily fooled the army by turning into a human at will. But it didn't. Outside the city, there was a large desert. This desert was like a natural line of defense. Even if the sea beasts managed to attack inland, They would be severely hindered by this desert. The sea beasts couldn't live without water, and the desert environment was the sea beasts' least favorite environment. Therefore, there wasn't much human activity in the desert other than the observation stations that were set up at regular intervals. It was incredibly empty. This desert was the robot's target. There was a tracker installed on Silin, so Silin would receive a signal no matter where he went. Pistura and the others could easily track him down. But now, Pistura stared at the screen in his hand, but there was no signal at all. This meant that the tracker's signal had been blocked, and neither the satellite's global scan nor his WeChat ID were picking up any activity. Senior brother, the satellites and global scanning have been tampered with. They're temporarily paralyzed. Gorio reported to Pistura through the communicator. How long will it take to recover? I don't know. The technicians haven't made any progress yet. I've contacted Teacher Guan, and someone from the Royal Academy of Sciences will be remotely guiding the repair process, but I'm not sure when it'll be completed. All right, hurry up and find it. It's over there in the desert. All right. Pistura had just received news that Silin was seen running towards the desert, but he didn't know where exactly. He was too fast to catch up to. Right now, Pistura and the others were cursing Silin 1,000 times in their minds. The bastard really was a troublesome person. How many times had they told him not to leave their sight? And what did he get in the end? As soon as the incident happened, that guy ran away without a trace. Wasn't he afraid of being kidnapped too? Pistura didn't like Silin very much, but he still did his best to search for him. He was his junior brother after all, and he wouldn't be able to explain himself if something really happened to Silin. After Silin entered the desert, he gradually began to be attacked. There were a lot of robots hiding in the desert, robot scorpions, robot lizards, robot eagles, and so on. Moreover, they could change their body color so that they would be in line with their surroundings. Not only could they change their color, but they could also turn invisible. That being said, being invisible was nothing to Silin. He could see the invisible robots. These robots used magnetic fields to distort the air around them to turn invisible. But Silin was very sensitive to magnetic fields. He could detect even the slightest change in the magnetic field if Silin thinks he's paying attention. Silin dodged the laser bullets fired by the robots as he ran. He blocked the ones he couldn't dodge with his longsword. There weren't many blades that could block laser bullets, and Silin's was one of them. Silin waved his hand and cut a charging mechanical lizard in half before jumping away with his right foot. The next moment, a corroded hole appeared where he was standing. The yellow sand let out sizzling sounds as it melted and turned black. Silin cut into the sand with his sword before he hit the ground and picked out the thing hidden underneath. It was a thin snake 1/2 meter long, the same color as the sand. It spat venom at Silin's open mouth when Silin picked it up. Silin sidestepped the venom and cut the snake in half. The two halves of the snake's body revealed a mechanical form. It was a robot snake. A mechanical snake actually hid such a tyrannical venom. It looked like these robots had other tricks up their sleeves besides the weapons they carried with them. A gale blew past and covered the sky with sand, but the battle was still going on. The robots wouldn't stop attacking just because of the sand. Silin was dodging and killing, but he still had a chase after the figure in front of him. It was indeed difficult. After leaving the city, the figure suddenly stopped and turned to look at Silin. As it turned around, the appearance of the robot changed from the old academician to a beautiful woman. Her eyes were full of charm, and the V-shaped opening in front of her chest revealed her plump breasts. I didn't expect you to be able to chase me all the way here. Even the voice was full of charm. Silin stood not far away from it. He didn't even look behind him and cut a robot scorpion in half with his sword. Isn't this your goal? Why did you leave me here? You really don't know? The robot chuckled softly and slowly lowered its eyes. Actually, I want to get the other formulas of sea blue gold from you, but now. Master has changed his mind. After the robot finished speaking, it raised its eyes again. At the same time, the desert behind it started to move. Protrusions started to appear on the sand, and they started to converge. When they rushed out of the sand, they slowly turned into human shapes. Almost all of them were people Silin had seen before. There were also a lot of familiar faces: Pistura, Fu Qingqing, Goryeo, Guanfeng, Jen Xingqian. Sillin stared at the formation without much emotion on his face or in his eyes. He simply cut down the robots one by one when they charged at him. The robot understood human psychology very well. Actually, for people, even if they knew that the people in front of them weren't the real ones, they still had the same faces and many of their eyes were so similar. It was hard not to be traumatized when they personally cut them in half. However, Sillin's hands were steady, and he swung his sword cleanly without any hesitation. It was as if he didn't know these faces at all. A machine was a machine, and it was different from a human being. Even if it had taken on a human face, even if its gaze was just a little bit similar, that was all it was. It could not be replaced. In Sillin's eyes, there were two planes that could not be overlapped. There was no intersection. Old people, children, familiar faces. Sillin's eyes didn't waver in the slightest when he cut them in half. TSK, I think you're more like a robot than we are, the original robot said. All right, I think it's time for us to talk. The robot waved its hand, and the other robots stopped attacking Sillin and retreated. Sillin sheathed his sword and stood there just like before. All that was left were the hissing, mechanical bodies on the ground. They don't know the sea blue gold formula at all, so it's useless even if you capture them. The Empire and RAS won't tell you anything, Sillin said. The robot knew that Sillin was talking about the two RAS academicians who were kidnapped, but it didn't answer the question directly. Instead, it asked, "You've been on this planet for more than 10 days now, and you've witnessed the war between humans and beasts. You must know the average combat power and military equipment of this planet." Sillin just looked at it and didn't say anything. He didn't know what this guy was trying to say. The robot continued. "The weapons of the people here are several levels lower than the weapons of the RAS Weapons Research Institute. In the past, that minor noble was in charge alone, and he's always been on guard against the interference of other forces from outside the planet, even though the residents of this planet have always been living in the chaos of war. Of course, after a long period of brainwashing, the residents who don't know the level of development outside the planet have no complaints. The war has made them numb. However, after this time, their thinking will change." The robot stretched out its hand, and a projector in its palm projected a 5-meter-long and 3-meter-wide screen. The screen displayed the current battle in the city. It was a battle between 3 armies and robots. The flashing beams of light and particle cannons were extremely beautiful, and even the locals who were avoiding the battlefield could see the scene from afar. The screen that popped up from the robot's other hand was showing the battle between the locals and the sea beasts. Sillin had seen this before. Obviously, there was a gap. This was the gap. It's like a person living in a remote mountainous area. As long as they don't come into contact with the outside world, they won't feel that they're poor or backward. But when the outside world breaks the peace of this small mountainous area in the name of supporting the weak and supporting development, the people here will realize their poverty and experience the so-called inferiority complex. Perhaps at this time, the residents hiding in the distance will think, if they have such weapons and equipment, will they still be bullied by the sea beasts? "You talk too much," Sillin said. He didn't have any other thoughts because of what the robot said. Once a person started to feel emotional, they would be shaken. After being shaken once, there would be a second time. Then, the robot would bring up another topic to drive Sillin's emotions, and then slowly pry open Sillin's psychological defenses. The robot looked at Sillin's reaction and smiled helplessly. "You really are more like a primitive type robot." "Primitive type? Does that mean you're an evolved type?" Sillin said. The robot said proudly, "Yes, we're evolved type robots. We have the thoughts of a human, but the abilities of a robot." Following the robot's voice, the robot that was split in half by Sillin joined back together. Then, the cut gradually began to repair, and the repaired parts were not visible at all. However, the robots that were split in half on the head did not move. Sillin raised his hand and shot the head of a robot that had just recovered. Bang! The bullet that was shot into the robot's head caused a partial explosion, and the entire robot's head was blown to pieces. The robot that had lost its head stood there and reacted mechanically for a moment, and then there was no movement. In the beautiful robot's eyes, Sillin's action was a provocation. "I don't want to waste time. You don't have any sincerity at all, Silin said slowly. Sincerity? The originally angry robot quickly turned into a smile. Are you willing to give me the recipe of the sea blue gold? I want to see those two people, Silin said. It wasn't I want to see, but I want to see. From this sentence, one could tell that Silin was quite domineering. Sure. The beautiful robot reached out her hand, and the image on the light screen showed the old academician sealed in two transparent cabins. He seemed to have fainted. After seeing the image, Silin shook his head. I don't believe your image. It's too easy for you robots to tamper with this. I believe that the reason why the three armies can't find me now is because of you guys messing with the communication detection network. You're quite cunning. I also don't believe that you would tell me the recipe of the sea blue gold so easily. The beautiful robot retracted her hand and said, How much credibility does Black Viper have? Silin countered. The beautiful robot stared at Silin for 5 seconds and suddenly smiled. Okay, I'll take you there. As soon as her voice fell, the beautiful robot turned into an eagle and flew away. This time, Silin used the hoverboard and followed the eagle. The eagle took Silin to a sand dune in the desert, landed on the sand dune, and then let out an eagle cry. After the eagle cry, a part of the sand dune began to change. 1/3 of the sand dune turned into 2 large robots that were curled up in a protective posture around 2 transparent cabins. The 2 old academicians were inside the transparent cabins. Although they were unconscious, Silin could see the pulse on their wrists. Judging from their pulse and blood pressure, they were just in a normal coma and weren't in any life-threatening danger. Now that you've seen it, show me your sincerity, said the eagle who landed on the sand dune. The eagle looked in a certain direction as soon as he finished speaking. The entire sand dune began to change at the same time. 2/3 of the sand dune had turned into various robots. They were the ones who had transformed this sand dune. In the direction the eagle was looking at, Pistura was pulling a one-man airship toward them. Goryo and Fuchinching were following closely behind Pistura. The eagle wasn't nervous or angry at the fact that Pistura and the other 2 had chased after him. Instead, he smiled. Your senior brothers and sisters are here, kid. What do you think will happen if they run into my subordinates? Chapter 256. The robot eagle's so-called subordinates were referring to the ones that had escaped from the sand dunes, and not the ones that Silin had been fighting against earlier. In comparison, Silin could sense that the former's defense was stronger than the latter's. Putting aside their attack power for now, just the camouflage of these robots into sand dunes was enough to tell who was superior. Actually, there was another way. This was what Whis had told him. The higher the level of a robot, the more complete and clear its machine language would be, and the less unorganized it would be. Of course, not everyone could use this method. Those who didn't understand machine language would never be able to see through it. The first robot lizard charged toward Pistura at the very front. It was so fast that the only thing left in its wake was a trail of sand. The robot lizard was already in front of Pistura when he jumped down from the airship, but Pistura didn't fire a shot. Pistura didn't fire his gun, however. He grabbed the mechanical lizard by its neck and crushed it into pieces by the time he landed on the ground. Pistura tossed the headless robot lizard onto the sand and looked at the robot eagle standing on top of a large robot. Then he looked at the 2 people locked inside the transparent pods and walked toward them step by step. Fuchinching and Goryo walked behind Pistura in a triangular formation. Pistura's action was subconsciously the best answer to the robot eagle's question. Silin smiled. It looks like the outcome is clear. The robot eagle's eyes focused and let out a high-pitched cry. The robots that had separated from the sand dunes and the mechanical animals that had rushed out of the sand after hearing the eagle's cry surrounded Silin's group of 4. The robots guarding the 2 transparent pods were the only ones that didn't move. The robot eagle flapped its wings like a battle horn, signaling the start of the battle. These robots were much harder and more agile than the previous ones. They could even transform into other animals when they dodged in the air to better defend themselves. Silin ignored the people inside the 2 transparent pods and swung his sword to attack the robots with Pistura and the others. These robots and mechanical beasts had a chance to start over as long as their heads weren't completely destroyed. So they had to make sure that their heads were completely destroyed with every blow. Moreover, there were too many of them, and it would be a huge burden if they couldn't finish them all off in one go. Humans couldn't compete with robots in endurance, after all. Scylla swung his sword non-stop, but he didn't use his gun. He was able to find the perfect angle and strength for every swing of his sword in the shortest amount of time possible. It was a great way to conserve stamina, but it was just enough to shatter a robot's head. Scylla clearly sensed the robot's ability to learn while they were fighting. They weren't just fast, they were also very skillful. They were able to learn from Scylla and the others' fighting skills. Other than that, there was also their calculation ability. Goryo and the others had been using guns since a long time ago. At first, their hit rate was 100%, but as time went on, their hit rate started to drop. Some of the robots were already able to dodge bullets or use their shields to block part of the bullet's impact. As a result, the battle grew more and more intense as time went on. Guanfeng couldn't allow their hit rate to be lower than 99.9% during training, but Goryo, Fu Qingqing, and Pastura's hit rate had fallen below this value. These robots were able to analyze the bullet's trajectory based on the previous shots and figure out the best way to dodge or block a bullet when it was aimed at them. Therefore, the robots were able to calculate where the bullet would land when Goryo and the others opened fire. Pastura and the others were aware of this drawback, but there was nothing they could do about it. The fastest bullet in the Purgatory Thunder snake type E-round didn't have an explosive ability, but the robots could take advantage of the difference in speed to dodge the bullets. Just as Goryo was getting more and more exhausted, 3 mechanical lizards and 2 mechanical snakes charged at him. When Goryo fired at them, the 2 mechanical snakes and 2 mechanical lizards dodged. Only one of the mechanical lizards was shot in the head and lost its ability to fight. Goryo kept firing while dodging. Although the remaining 2 robot lizards and snakes were killed one after another, more robots joined the fray during this time. Goryo's experience was limited, and he wasn't as experienced as Pastura and Fu Qingqing. At the very least, he wasn't as mentally prepared in a situation like this. After narrowly dodging the robot snake's venom and the robot lizard's laser bullets, a robot sand scorpion swung its hooked tail at Goryo. Bang! The robot sand scorpion's head exploded and its hooked tail slowed down. Goryo dodged the attack. Bang, bang, bang. After the robot sand scorpion, the robot animals surrounding Goryo were shot in the head one after another. Thanks. Goryo took the opportunity to thank Scylla. Scylla's gun didn't stop firing, and the explosions didn't stop at all. With Scylla as a factor, Pastura's trio's bullets arrived, while the other robots and robot animals were focused on Scylla. A robot could dodge a bullet from one of Pastura's trio, but it couldn't dodge all 3 of them. At the very least, it wasn't possible right now. The 100 or so robots and robot animals had dwindled to a little over 20, and their numbers were decreasing with every passing second. The robot eagle looked into the distance and saw an army heading their way. They couldn't drag this out any longer, and judging from the current situation, these people weren't going to trade the formula. The robot eagle shook its wings and grabbed the transparent pods in its hands. Since you're not sincere, then, actually, the mechanical eagle wanted to see the expressions on the faces of Serene and the others when they personally witnessed the miserable state of the 2 old fellows locked inside the transparent pods being crushed into minced meat. But before it could finish speaking, it heard 2 cracking sounds. When it looked over, the 2 big robots' hands that were originally holding onto the transparent pods were already gone, leaving behind only the crackling sounds of electricity at the front ends of their broken wrists. The gray shadow flashed past and charged towards Scylla, knocking away a few mechanical animals that were blocking its way along the way. Then, it landed on Scylla's shoulder and calmly licked its claws. Pastura and the others didn't see what happened just now. Pastura had received a secret order to keep the formula a secret, even if it meant sacrificing the 2 old academicians. Moreover, the culprit was to be captured and executed, so he was prepared to see a bloody scene. He didn't expect to see the two giant robots' arms missing their wrists when he turned around to look at them. Goryo and Fu Qingqing were a little stunned as well. There were only 7 or 8 mechanical beasts left now, and Sillin took out all of them during this gap. The robot eagle stared intently at Hui Mao, who was licking its paws and wiping its face on Sillin's shoulder. It couldn't understand why the cat would suddenly appear without a sound. Logically speaking, no living creature should be able to escape its detection, but this cat had subverted everything it knew. Moreover, the 2 robot arms and the transparent pods had suddenly disappeared. The robot eagle couldn't figure out what was going on no matter how hard it thought about it. Is it also a mechanical type? No. The results of a spectral analysis are different from these evolved machines. But why do I feel like something's wrong? Bang! The protective light shield in front of the mechanical eagle blocked Sillin's incoming bullets and pulled the mechanical eagle's attention back to the front. The eagle had to admit that Sillin's gun was very threatening. It would have been a pile of scrap metal by now if it wasn't for the beam shield. The feathers under its wings turned into propellers, and the eagle took to the sky. The 2 robots slowly transformed into fighter jets and took to the sky. Boom! Boom! The 2 beams of light hit the 2 big robots, and the 2 big robots that were shot fell to the ground, causing a small storm to rise. The other beam that was shot at the eagle was dodged by the eagle, but the eagle was hit by 5 consecutive bullets from Sillin, who was flying over on hoverboard. The bullets didn't hit the eagle directly, but hit the protective light shield around the eagle instead. However, the vibrations caused by the shield lowered the eagle's agility, and Pastura fired a lightning net at it. The electric net wrapped the whole eagle inside, and the protective light shield gradually faded under the use of the electric net. The eagle let out a loud cry, and Sillin and Pastura swiftly retreated. As expected, the robot eagle exploded the next moment, and a shockwave from the explosion pushed Sillin far away. Fortunately, Sillin's body was strong, or he would have broken his bones and tendons. Sillin turned around to look at Pastura. Fine, the guy has protective gear. There's no need to worry at all. Sillin landed on the ground, swaying unsteadily. Use this thing less in the future. It's not good, Pastura said. To Pastura, hoverboards were something for kids to play with. They could only be used to look cool, and their extremely low stability made them useless on the battlefield. That was why he didn't recommend Sillin to use them all the time. Sillin nodded in agreement, but he had a different thought in his mind. He was used to hoverboards, and the one he was riding on was something he'd modified himself. Although it looked like a normal flying toy to others, Sillin still liked it a lot. It was convenient and had a lot of freedom. Hui Mao spat out the thing in his mouth. Hui Mao's mouth suddenly grew very big when he spat it out, but it only lasted for a very short time. The thing quickly returned to its original size after he spat it out. Pastura and the others only saw a gray blur before the 2 hands holding the translucent pods popped out. There were even a few pieces of undigested sea beast meat stuck to them. Goryo and Fu Qingqing's faces contorted when they saw it. Pastura still had a stern expression on his face, but the corner of his eyes couldn't help but twitch a little when he saw it. Disgusting. The 2 old academicians were still unconscious inside the pods. Pastura opened the pods and checked their condition. They're not in any danger. They'll be fine after an injection. Pastura started inspecting the surroundings after he said that. The machines that kept emitting static noises were strewn all over the ground. Right now, all Pastura wanted to do was ask Guanfeng for permission to use the Purgatory Thunder Snake K again. Every time he saw the Purgatory Thunder Snake K, he felt that the Purgatory Thunder Snake, he was pretty slow. After the battle against the robots, he realized that the Purgatory Thunder Snake, he couldn't keep up. Moreover, Guanfeng was starting to develop the Purgatory Thunder Snake S. They weren't going to use the Purgatory Thunder Snake E when the time came. It didn't take long for Jin Xingqian to arrive with his men. He was the one who ordered the particle beams to shoot down the 2 giant robots. Jin Xingqian let out a sigh of relief when he saw that Sillin was unharmed. He didn't really care about the 2 old academicians' safety. Pastura's communicator suddenly rang while he was observing the situation on the ground. The fact that his communicator was ringing meant that the network had more or less recovered. "Captain, something's happened here." Fu Qingqing and Goryeo also received messages while Pastura was answering the call. Both of them reported the same thing. Something had happened at Stappen's place. There was no doubt that Sillin was the focal point of this incident, but a lot of people had forgotten about Stappen. Even if Stappen was in the same building as the people from the RAS, something had still gone wrong when both the Imperial United Guard and the Royal Guard were watching over him. To think that the people under their protection would still be threatened by an outsider. One had to admire the robot's capabilities. When they were discovered inside the building, the academicians and scholars of the RAS and Stappen in the next room had passed out and were in a deep coma. Tests revealed that they had been hypnotized, and a lot of information had been leaked. Although it couldn't be said to be extremely important, the information they possessed couldn't be underestimated. As for Stappen, Sillin could understand why the robots were looking for him. It was true that Sillin was the only one present who knew about the latest C blue gold formula, but Stappen was the one who had discovered the formula in the first place. Since they couldn't get the formula from Sillin, they might as well start with Stappen. With Black Viper's intelligence, it was only natural that they would be able to analyze a couple of new C blue gold formulas based on Stappen's research methods. As for the best formula, the one that came from the Sea King egg, he didn't know if it would work. Of course, one thing was for sure. The people of the RES would be very busy after today. They would use every second they had to research C blue gold and prevent themselves from falling behind Black Viper. It would be a huge embarrassment if the RAS's research on C blue gold fell behind Black Vipers when the time came. At the same time, in space outside the planet, a robot that looked similar to a mechanical eagle revealed itself from stealth at a certain distance away from the military starships stationed outside the planet. A spaceplane revealed itself in front of it, and before the military starships could react, the mechanical eagle flew into the spaceplane. Then, the spaceplane entered stealth mode again and left the area at top speed. Sillin didn't need to worry about the spaceplane outside the planet. That was something the military and the higher-ups of both sides would discuss in depth. After being asked a few standard questions, Sillin was arranged to enter a building. Of course, it wasn't the original building. The original building had been reduced to rubble during the battle between the military and the robots. His return date had been pushed back by 2 days. Sillin lay on his bed and closed his eyes to rest. Fighting against the robots was too mentally exhausting, and he had to calculate and counter-calculate every second of the day. Now that he had finally relaxed, he unsurprisingly felt a lot of fatigue. After Huimao walked around the room, he opened his mouth and spat out an egg. This was the sea monster egg that he used as a toy to relieve his boredom. At that time, in order to cooperate with Sillin's actions, he couldn't bear to put the egg down, so he swallowed it directly. Huimao originally thought that it would be fine if the egg was digested, but he didn't expect that the egg would still be in good condition. The outer layer of attachment had been digested, and the eggshell had become a lot smoother, but it was still intact. It's really hard to digest. Huimao pushed the egg with his claws. Without the attachment, the egg rolled on the ground. After playing with the egg for a while, Huimao jumped onto Sillin's shoulder and closed his eyes as if he was taking a nap. But in fact, Huimao and Sillin were communicating. The people monitoring them couldn't detect the silent interaction between the man and the cat at all. The moment these robots appeared, Sillin felt a sense of familiarity. Many of these robots had independent thoughts, especially the one leading them. Aside from their metal bodies, their thoughts were closer to that of a human's. They had their own expressions and emotions, and they knew anger. Their rich emotions made Sillin think that he was reminded of Sigma, who lived in a distant galaxy. Huimao's guess was proven right. Every type of machine could be deduced based on their mechanical language. If he were to use the human evolutionary tree as a comparison, then even if the robots and mechanical beasts didn't belong to the same branch, they all originated from the same starting point. It was the same starting point as Sigma. In other words, Sigma's master was indeed in this star system. Many years had passed, and Sigma's master was long gone. However, there was still his legacy. But was the descendant of Sigma's master really in Black Viper? Back in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, Sillin hadn't discovered anything about Sigma's master. Sillin even went through some historical records, but he couldn't find anything. At one point, Sillin even suspected that this galaxy was the one Sigma spoke of. Now, it seemed that he was right. The Mechanical Eagle's final cry was to confirm whether the operation against Stappen on the other side was going smoothly or not. After receiving confirmation that everything was going well, the Mechanical Eagle decisively self-destructed. Are we really going to stand against Sigma's master, Sillin? Huimao asked. He didn't like the robots and mechanical beasts in the slightest. It was the complete opposite of how he felt when he first saw Sigma. Sigma would make him want to get close to them, but these robots made him seriously sick to his stomach. I don't know yet, but I'm sure we'll find out in the future, Sillin said. Huimao let out a long sigh. What if he couldn't stop himself from killing the descendant of Sigma's master if we really did end up as enemies? Sillin patted Huimao's shoulder and said, All right, don't think too much. We don't know anything yet, so don't worry yourself. The next 2 days were relatively quiet, so Sillin didn't have to worry too much. Right now, the busiest people in the RAS were the ones with the most work. The incident this time had given the RAS a wake-up call, and the research of both information technology and new materials was of the utmost urgency. If they couldn't produce results soon, the robots would slip away right under their noses again. The top brass of the RAS had called for an emergency meeting after this incident, but Sillin didn't know the specifics of the meeting. He didn't care to know either. Right now, Sillin was going back with 3 armies. Why 3 armies? Because other than the Imperial Guards, Jin Xingxin and the Jin family were also going with him. A lot of people were starting to think about why the Jin family wouldn't leave their side. Guanfeng hadn't contacted Sillin during this time. It was very strange. In the past, Guanfeng would have contacted Sillin at least once. This time, however, Sillin couldn't reach him even if he wanted to. Sillin finally learned the reason why he couldn't contact Guanfeng all this time after he arrived at AF1. Jin Xingxin and his men were restricted to a certain extent in AF1, so he only brought a few people with him. The rest of them waited at the designated location. The first thing Sillin did after he returned to AF1 was to find Guanfeng. Sillin felt an oppressive chill before he even entered the house. He shot a glance at Jin Xingxin, who was pretending to know nothing, and finally opened the door to the courtyard. The moment he stepped inside, the ring on Sillin's finger started vibrating. It was numb and painful as if it had been electrocuted, but it didn't feel like it was in danger. In fact, it felt like it couldn't wait any longer. This was the first time the ring with the curly leaf pattern had reacted like this since he got it for so many years. The door to Guanfeng's residence was kicked open from the inside with a bang. The entire electronic door was sent flying. Jin Xingxin and a couple of Jin family members who were standing behind Sillin shuddered and backed away when they heard the door being kicked open. Jin Liao, this is my territory. How dare you kick open my door in my territory? Guanfeng's roar came from inside the residence. Guanfeng had always been a gentleman in front of outsiders. He always wore a smile on his face, but the roar had shattered his gentlemanly image to smithereens. After the door was kicked open, a white-haired figure appeared. His figure was tall and straight, and he didn't look crooked or decrepit at all. When Sillin saw the person standing at the door, he felt like he was seeing Jinya again. However, this person's aura was too strong. The sharpness of his aura, which had been accumulated over the years, was so strong that no one dared to look him in the eye. Jinya's aura was as gentle as a warm breeze on a sunny day. Their faces were similar, but their styles were completely different. Jin Liao was sitting on the sofa in Guanfeng's living room, sipping tea and exchanging insults with Guanfeng. Suddenly, his finger trembled. How many years had it been since he felt something like this? When they were young, their father had given them 3 rings and put them on. When they put on the rings, and the rings turned into a circle of curly leaf patterns on their fingers, he had felt something like this. There was a time when Jin Liao thought that he would never feel something like this again. After their sister passed away for some reason, Jin Liao would often stare blankly at the curly leaf patterns on his fingers. At the time, Jin Liao had already abdicated his position, and he had experienced a sorrow he had never experienced before. Every time the gears of time moved, it was like the teeth of the gears were pressing into his heart. Every time he thought about it, he could always see the clear imprint of the gears. It was an unforgettable memory of the passage of time. Therefore, when this feeling appeared on his finger again, Jin Liao had the urge to cry. However, the person standing not far away from him didn't look like the person he remembered. Although Jin Liao had investigated Silin and analyzed Silin's genotype, this contradictory feeling was still very uncomfortable. Is he gone? It's been so many years, and the ring has changed owners. Jin Liao strode towards Silin while suppressing his uneven breathing. After glancing at the curly leaf pattern on Silin's finger, he grabbed Silin by the shoulder and dragged him into the house. Jin Xingxin and the others were about to follow him in, but Jin Liao's shout jolted them back to their senses. Guanfeng watched as Jin Liao dragged his student into a room and slammed the door shut with a bang. He opened his mouth, cursed under his breath, and turned his attention to Jin Xingxin and the others who were standing in the yard. They started talking about the compensation for his house and the mental damage he had suffered. Silin didn't fight back, even though he was dragged into the room by the collar. He thought that the man in front of him was way too different from Jinya, and that Jinya wouldn't have grabbed someone like this back in the day. It was only after Jin Liao dragged Silin into the room that he realized that the room was Guanfeng's spare kitchen. Jin Liao found the pots and pans in the room an eyesore, so he grabbed them all, squeezed them into a ball, opened the window, and tossed them out. After he was done, Jin Liao opened a barrier and turned the room into a small cubicle that couldn't be seen or heard from the outside. "You." Jin Liao was so excited that he couldn't utter a "you" for a very long time. In the end, he grabbed Silin's collar and shook it a little. "Speak, Silin. Come on, what do you want me to say? I don't know anything about the Jin family." After a moment of thought, Silin said, "Ahem, my master left this ring to me after he passed away." "Your master is Jinya?" Jin Liao's voice was trembling and a little hoarse. He looked like he was trying to suppress something. Silin nodded. Although he was mentally prepared, Jin Liao still couldn't stop the tears from welling up in his eyes when he heard that Jinya had passed away. He took a few deep breaths to hold back his tears and asked, "Did he leave anything behind?" "Yes, my master hoped that he could return to his roots." Silin took out the wooden coffin with a wave of his hand. The coffin was still tightly sealed, but Jin Liao could sense that the person inside was Jinya. He could sense that the person inside the coffin, made of Fuji tree, shared the same bloodline as him. Jin Liao's expression changed abruptly when he put his finger on the coffin. He swiftly put away the coffin, grabbed a sad Silin, and kicked the door open. Guanfeng and Jin Xingxin were in the middle of discussing compensation when they saw Jin Liao run like the wind and drive away in the flying car. Jin Xingxin had come in. He didn't even leave Jin Xingxin behind. The people in the courtyard were left standing there in a daze. Chapter 257. Silin knew that Jin Liao was very agitated. He didn't loosen his grip on Silin's collar, even after he had jumped onto the flying car. Moreover, his legs had been trembling ever since he sat down. It was obvious that he was in a hurry and didn't want to deal with the people chasing after him. In the affiliated schools, no matter whose flying car it was, except for the flying cars driven by the campus patrol team, which were allowed to exceed the speed limit under certain special circumstances, other people were not allowed to do so. However, not only did Jin Liao increase his flying car speed to its maximum, he even took a few shortcuts to minimize the distance between 2 points. Jin Liao turned a deaf ear to the campus patrol team and a bunch of Euroists that were following behind him. Perhaps it was because the school patrol team and the enforcement robots were too annoying, but Jin Liao directly contacted the higher-ups of the affiliated schools. He didn't care what the other side of the call would say. He cut off the call right away and ignored the angry faces of the people on the other end of the line. Half a minute later, the campus patrol team and a law enforcement robot were retrieved. Therefore, when the group of people from the affiliated school saw the flying car flying past them without any regard for order, they all had the same thought. Why aren't there any pursuers? Many people in the affiliated schools had raced before and were often hauled away by the school patrol team, and the enforcement robots for punishment. But this flying car was too king arrogant. Some of the students even sent a video of the incident to the affiliated school's main surveillance center to report it, but all of them shut up when they saw the flying car. When Jin Liao drove the flying car to the port, a large space plane with the Jin family's insignia was already waiting for him. The door opened, and Jin Liao drove the flying car inside. The space plane quickly took off. Jin Liao didn't loosen his grip on Silen's collar, even after he got off the flying car and walked into his private lounge. It was as if Silen would run away the moment he let go. He didn't say anything or explain himself. His violent aura made it clear to everyone who saw Jin Liao that the former King Fuji was in an irritable and impatient mood. No one was stupid enough to walk up to him and get scolded. The space plane flew directly to the territory of the Jin family in the imperial capital. There was a planet there where King Fuji's manor was located. The people living on that planet were all important figures of the Jin family, such as Jin Liao, Jin Xingqian, and Jin Xingming. The planet where King Fuji's residence was located was called Planet Fuji. From space, the entire planet appeared green, like a forest and also like a lake. It looked full of life. The space plane landed in a corner of the palace. Jin Liao couldn't wait to drag Silen back to a courtyard inside the palace. The courtyard was Jin Liao's residence after he retired. It wasn't far from the current King Fuji's residence, and it was the most heavily guarded place. Although the guards were curious about Silen's identity, they kept their expressions serious and focused when they saw Jin Liao dragging Silen into the courtyard. Although the guards were curious about Silen's identity, they didn't bother to look to the side. There was a thick tree inside Jin Liao's courtyard. It was a tree that Silen was very familiar with. He had come into contact with it since he was a child. It was called Fuji, the upper tree. It was similar to the one in Jinya's courtyard, but this one was much thicker and more lush. It was a far cry from the one Jin Liao had seen before. Jin Liao dismissed all the servants and left the courtyard to his trusted aides. He finally let go of Silen, and Silen rubbed his neck. He didn't even need to look to know that there was a mark on his neck. The old man might be old, but he was strong enough to wring a person like a chick. Jin Liao pressed a switch on the wall, and a green pool appeared on the ground. Jin Liao took out the coffin and carefully placed it into the pool. As soon as the coffin came into contact with the water in the pool, a large amount of air bubbles appeared around the originally tightly sealed coffin. The lid of the coffin loosened at the same time. Silen stared at the pond without blinking. She seemed to have sensed what was going to happen next, and her emotions rippled in a rare way. The gray cat carefully poked its head out from Silen's shoulder. The old man's series of excited actions earlier had left the gray cat unsure of how to react, so it could only grab Silen tightly and allow itself to be brought to this place. Since the old man didn't say anything and didn't toss it out, and the guards outside didn't react, the gray cat naturally followed them to this place. Of course, Hui Mao was aware of the changes in Silen's heart rate, so it was curious as to what the old man was going to do. Hui Mao already knew that there was a person lying inside the coffin. Was the old man going to perform an autopsy? Plop! The lid of the coffin finally broke free from the bottom and floated up. The boiling water pushed the lid to the side, revealing the person lying inside. The person soaking in the pool looked exactly the same as he remembered. He looked very peaceful, just like when Silen had placed him in the coffin. The only difference was that Silen could sense Jinya's life force. No wonder Jinya had asked Silen to bury him like this. No wonder Jin Liao jumped into the pool with trembling hands, took out a tube, and injected it into Jinya's body. Jinya's life force quickly returned to normal after the injection, and his heartbeat grew stronger and stronger. Jinya hadn't died yet. It was just that Jinya had caused his metabolism to almost completely stop in the past, putting him in a state of suspended animation. However, under the stimulation of this plant hormone extracted from the Fuji tree, his stagnant metabolism would restart. As long as he was taken care of properly, his bodily functions would gradually recover. Jin Liao tossed the empty tube to the side and made a sound that sounded like he was crying and laughing at the same time. Jin Liao's back was facing Sillin, so Sillin couldn't see his expression. However, he could sense his emotions from the rhythm of his breathing. Both of them were in the same mood. Jinya floated up from the pool, and Jin Liao carefully placed him into a recovery pod. The pod would automatically provide the optimal ratio of air and nutrients according to the patient's physical condition and physiological needs. Sillin and Jin Liao watched quietly from the side. Neither of them made a sound, and the only sound in the room was the sound of the healing pods and the sound of Wheeze scratching itself with its head tilted to one side. An hour later, the indicator light of the recovery pod turned from red to green. It was also at this time that Jinya opened his eyes. The lid of the recovery pod opened, and Jinya's eyes darted around to see the two people in front of him. At first, he was a little dazed, as if he couldn't see them clearly. However, his eyes gradually adapted to the light and regained their ability to see. Sillin, his voice carried the hoarseness of someone who had just recovered from a long illness, but it was as amiable as before. Time seemed to have returned to the courtyard, filled with memories. He was lying on the wooden rocking chair under the Fuji tree, making the chair creak as it swayed. In the fine light that sprinkled through the gaps between the leaves, he slowly muttered, "Sillin, help Master get a bottle of alcohol, something strong. Sillin, help Master massage his back. He's getting old, and it's easy for his back to hurt after lying down for too long. Sillin, help Master." Sillin was so touched that he wanted to cry when he heard that voice again after so long. He covered his burning eyes with his hands, but he couldn't help but look through the gaps between his fingers at the person lying in the recovery pod. It's so good to be alive. Huimao blinked and looked at the person lying in the pod. Then, he looked at the old man with a dark expression and bulging veins on his forehead. He wagged his tail and chuckled inwardly. The old man had been ignored. Jin Liao was furious. Hadn't he rushed back to the Jin family from the affiliated school in order to revive Jinya as soon as possible? The bastard was still as heartless as he was when he was young. Jin Liao wanted to bang his head against the wall the moment he opened his mouth. He was expecting Jinya to call him brother in excitement, but he didn't expect Jinya to call him Sillin instead. In that moment, Jin Liao felt like he had been reduced to the background of a black and white sketch. Jinya's gaze finally landed on Jin Liao, whose face was contorted in anger. He was silent for half a minute before he finally called out, "Big brother," in a questioning tone. Jinya was still young when he left, and Jin Liao was still in the prime of his youth. Who would have thought that the next time they met, they would both be old men? But blood was a strange thing. Even though they were both old and far from their youthful selves, it was still easy to feel the bond of blood at first glance. Jinya smiled before Jin Liao could answer. He was now sure that the person standing in front of him was his own older brother, Jin Liao, who had been raised as the heir. So many years had passed, and Jin Liao hadn't succeeded to the throne yet. Now that they met again, Jin Liao had already stepped down. Although Sillin really wanted to chat with Jinya, judging from the current situation, it was better for him to back out. Some secrets were brought up again, and it wasn't convenient for Sillin to listen to them. "Sillin, I'll come find you later," Jinya said to Sillin. "All right." Sillin carried Huimao out the door. The guard at the door glanced at Sillin and was about to question him when Jin Liao's voice came from inside the house. "Take him to rest." An old servant walked over with a wide smile on his face. He led Sillin to another room in the courtyard to rest. "Sillin, I didn't expect your master to be a member of the Jin family. He's royalty and the younger brother of the old King Fuji. We won't have to worry about money in the future." Sillin was treated very well in this place. The old servant who served Jin Liao treated Sillin like he was his own grandson. Although he was an old servant, he had served Jin Liao for a very long time, and his status in the Jin family was very special. Sometimes, the side branches of the Jin family had to use honorifics when they saw the old servant. Even Jin Xingming didn't dare to order the old servant around. It was obvious how rare it was for the old servant to treat Sillin like this. It was already the next day when Sillin saw Jinya again. Jinya talked about the ownership of the ring. Although the ring could only be owned by someone of noble status in the Jin family's bloodline, it was still a matter for the older generation. Jin Liao didn't object to Jinya's decision to leave the ring to Sillin. Without Sillin, today's reunion wouldn't have happened, so Jin Liao was very grateful to Sillin. After Jinya left, he wandered the world for a very long time. He never married, and he didn't have any descendants even now. Although technology could be used to create a descendant, it wasn't something that could be produced in a short period of time. The fact that Jinya left the ring that symbolized his extraordinary status in the Jin family to Sillin instead of his own descendant meant that Sillin's special status was officially recognized. This meant that Sillin had a status that was even more special than the old servant in the Jin family. Apart from the fact that he didn't have the right to inherit the throne, he was treated the same as Jin Xingming and the other princes, if not better. After all, Sillin had two elders who were even older than him standing behind him. Jinya used to own a large manor, but he didn't live there for long before an accident happened. Now that he was standing in this manor again, he felt a deep sense of nostalgia. From this day onwards, Jinya and Sillin would live in this manor. If Jinya passed away in the future, everything here would be inherited by Sillin. Jinya left more than half of his subordinates and belongings to Sillin. The rest of the things that were too close to the Jin family were given to Jin Liao. After being away for so long, Jinya was no longer competitive. He had spent the best years of his life wandering the world, and he was content to return to the place where he started before he truly passed away. There was a 1,000-year-old Fuji tree in the manor that covered half of the yard. It was like an enlarged version of the courtyard in his memory. Jinya once said that Fuji trees were sentient. They were more like a species that existed between an animal and a plant. Although Fuji trees didn't move around as often as the plants that Sillin had seen before, they basically wouldn't move away after taking root in one place. They stood there for hundreds of thousands of years. In the entire empire, Fuji trees would only grow luxuriantly where the Jin family lived. Even if they were transplanted to other places, even if they were provided with superior conditions, they would never grow as well as the Jin family's Fuji trees. There were many 1,000-year-old Fuji trees similar to the one in the courtyard on the planet where Prince Fuji's manor was located. They were luxuriant with leaves, and it was hard to tell that they had lived for hundreds of thousands of years. However, they had indeed lived through the vicissitudes of life. They had witnessed the Jin family's development over the past 1,000 years, the passing of generations, the retirement of the older generation, and the rise of the new. Sillin supported Jinya and walked in front of the Fuji tree. Its thick trunk and sturdy roots showed just how long it had been alive. Jinya stared at the courtyard and the ancient tree in his memory for a long time. They had caused hundreds of years of time and space to condense here. Outside the courtyard, there were interwoven roads and pavilions that rose continuously. There were also flying cars and aircrafts in the sky. It was a dazzling sight. Jinya had only just recovered from a long illness, so he returned to his room to rest after a short walk in the courtyard, leaving Sillin to walk the cat in the courtyard. Huimao was very excited. He jumped from branch to branch like a pine tree, sometimes swaying on a branch and rushing to the top of the tree to enjoy himself. Sillin, Sillin. Huimao ran over excitedly and jumped on his Sillin's shoulder. Does that mean we're rich now? Of course, Huimao knew that Jinya had left a lot of his assets to Sillin. Huimao used the word we, which was a very subtle word. It seemed like this guy had always tied himself to Sillin. If Sillin was rich, it was rich too, because whatever it wanted, Sillin would buy. Huimao started thinking about what it wanted to buy. Fish biscuits and all-fish combo weren't what Huimao wanted the most right now. What Huimao wanted the most was a fish pond. Huimao's wish came true the next day. It mentioned it to Yunyi during dinner that night. So, the next day, when it jumped out of the window and was about to stretch, it found a fish pond. It was a 200-square-meter fish pond that Jinya had ordered to be built overnight. With the help of the digging robots, the pond was completed in one night. Currently, there were some fish swimming leisurely in the pond. Huimao circled around the pond, patrolling his territory. After some thought, Huimao rolled the egg that he hadn't eaten all this time over, grabbed it, and pushed it directly into the pond. This egg needs to hatch, doesn't it? Will the egg hatch if we just push it in like that? Yuan Xingming asked from not far away. After learning that Silin had become a member of the Zhen family, Zhen Xingming decisively skipped class and went home under the pretense of visiting his elders. Really? Hui Mao flicked his ears when he heard Zhen Xingming's words. Then he jumped back into the pond unwillingly and tossed the egg back up. Zhen Xingming was very worried that the egg would break when he saw Hui Mao tossing it around like a ball. All right, I heard that your teacher is pretty angry, Silin. Zhen Xingming turned to Silin. Many people knew that Guanfeng had a bad temper. He might look friendly normally, but it was very difficult to calm down once he was angry. Many people were guessing how Guanfeng would deal with Silin after what had happened to Silin. After all, it was a publicly known secret that Guanfeng and the Zhen family didn't get along. This was why none of Guanfeng's students were related to the Zhen family. However, Silin was an exception this time. Right now, Guanfeng's students were spread all over the major forces. The Zhen family was the only exception in the past, but that exception was gone now. Countless people were waiting to see Silin make a fool out of himself. Silin wasn't worried about this. Guanfeng wasn't stupid, and there were many things he knew about Silin and the Zhen family a long time ago. However, the fact that Guanfeng hadn't expressed his opinion or told Silin to cut ties with the Zhen family meant that Guanfeng didn't mind it at all. He wasn't like everyone else. The fact that Jin Liao was allowed into his house meant that Guanfeng wasn't completely cut off from the Zhen family. Jinya walked over slowly and smiled when he heard Zhen Xingming and Silin's conversation. Guanfeng, that guy's still as awkward as ever. It's been so many years, but he still can't let it go. Chapter 258. Guanfeng was from the same generation as Jinya and Jin Liao. He was a famous person when he was young, and his fame was on par with Jin Liao and the other royal descendants. The main reason Guanfeng disliked the Zhen family was because of Jin Liao. The two of them hated each other since they were young. Guanfeng thought Jin Liao was a boorish man who wore a noble's hat, but acted like a boorish man. Jin Liao thought Guanfeng was a hypocrite. The two of them would fight each other every 2 or 3 days at the affiliated school. Guanfeng didn't care about Jin Liao's identity at all. Everyone's identities were much less important in the affiliated school, and strength was the only thing that mattered. Jin Liao was a lot stronger than Guanfeng in terms of physical fitness, but Guanfeng had become famous since a long time ago. Be it academics or shooting skills, he was the one who proposed the Purgatory Thunder Snake project when a lot of nobles were busy racing their girlfriends. The project was recognized as one of the projects with potential by the RAS, and it caused quite a stir. Both the military and the RAS invited him ahead of time. It could be said that the only person who dared to beat up Guanfeng was the brute Jin Liao, and Guanfeng did suffer a lot at Jin Liao's hands. But after Guanfeng developed the Purgatory Thunder Snake, he turned the tables around. Ever since then, the two of them had been competing against each other and slandering each other. At first, they had Jinya to mediate between them. After all, Jinya was a nice guy back in the day. But after Jinya's accident, their relationship soured even further, and it looked like they would never see each other again. Back then, a lot of nobles and Jin Liao bullied non-noble people like Guanfeng, but they couldn't stop Guanfeng's monstrous talent. Gradually, some of them gave up. After Guanfeng became a prince's shooting instructor, those who spoke ill of him behind his back shut their mouths. Then, the prince who was taught shooting by Guanfeng took over the throne. Those people buried their resentment towards Guanfeng even deeper. There were a lot of nobles who disliked Guanfeng, and some of them had even been scolded by Guanfeng with a gun to their heads. Otherwise, why would there be so many people fanning the flames every time something happened to Guanfeng? But none of them were able to shake his position and influence in the empire. As a shooting instructor who had taught many princes and a famous academician of the RAS, Jin Liao was the only one who dared to criticize Guanfeng openly. As a result, the entire Mist Bodhisattva Empire learned of the grudge between the two. However, from the looks of it, the relationship between the two of them wasn't as bad as it seemed on the surface. Silin could feel the familiarity in Jinya's words. Actually, the other reason is because of Guanfeng's face, Jinya said with a smile. Back in the day, Guanfeng was very popular. Many noble girls fell in love with him at first sight, which is why most of the people who dislike him are males. Also, Guanfeng still looked so young, but were clearly old. Jin Xingming was massaging Jinya's shoulders in a fawning manner while listening to his grandfather's embarrassing past. Jin Xingming nodded in agreement when he heard Jinya's words. Guanfeng did have a pretty good face, but the owner of this face was clearly his grandfather's generation, and yet he still looked the same as the younger generations. It would be strange if he didn't attract jealousy. Jinya sat on a wooden chair next to a tree and smiled benevolently as he recounted the events of the past. These were very precious memories for Jinya, and he was more than happy to share them with his juniors. The current rocking chair was made by Jin Liao using 1,000-year-old Fuji wood. In terms of wood quality, it was much better than the wooden rocking chair in the small courtyard on planet Brown Earth. In Jin Liao's words, it could prolong one's life. It was very suitable for Jinya's current physical condition. It was a similar scene, but it was in two different places. Jin Xingming massaged Jinya's shoulders while Silin massaged his legs. After all, he had been in hibernation for many years, and he was getting on in years, so it would take him a while to return to his normal state. Hui Mao rolled the egg to the wooden rocking chair next to Jinya's. Then, he lay on the egg and wagged his tail lazily. His ears twitched from time to time as he listened to Jinya's stories and the movements in the fish pond. Silin stayed in this courtyard for the next few days. Guanfeng stopped by once to meet an old friend he hadn't seen for many years. Then, he left after staying for half a day without telling Silin to return to school. He tossed a couple of reference books and tutorials at Silin and told him to finish reading them. A couple of basic exams will be taking place very soon, and Guanfeng's student couldn't afford to fail any of them. Right now, Guanfeng was busy with the development of Purgatory Thundersnake S. Unlike other researchers, Guanfeng liked to think alone when he was researching something. Therefore, he didn't have time to worry about Silin until the Purgatory Thundersnake S was released. Silin had to rely on himself for everything. Don't ask me to plead on behalf of your teacher if you don't do well. I can't bring myself to do that. If you really do fail, you'll have to end your own life. Guanfeng's smile was unusually friendly when he said this. Jin Xingming hid behind Jinya's back and was glad that he was from AF3, unlike Silin. No one from the Jin family who wasn't close to the family had come to visit them for the past few days. At first, a lot of people wanted to curry favor with Jinya after learning of his existence. After all, Jinya was able to sway Jin Liao's decision with a single word, and his influence was undoubtedly much greater than Jin Xingchen's, even though he was still a prince. Who wouldn't want to suck up to such a thick thigh? Although they did want to curry favor with Jinya, they still had to put on a nice front. For example, they could use filial piety as an excuse. However, Jin Liao waved his hand and said, "Cut the bullshit." And so, everyone quieted down. The Jin family social network had been broken by Jinya. Many of his old acquaintances were no longer around, and the younger generation had their own interactions. Jinya didn't want to get involved. Jinya was currently recuperating, and he preferred peace and quiet. It was best if he didn't meet any random people in front of him. Jinya didn't want Silin to stay by his side all the time. He was a young man, and a young man should act like a young man. In Jinya's eyes, Silin was too quiet and rational since he was young. Jinya hoped that Silin could cause as much trouble as Jin Xingming did. In the past, Jinya was alone, and he might not have been able to protect Silin if something happened to him. But now that he was back at home, he had the power to do so. He actually hoped that Silin could cause a little trouble like Jin Xingming did. One day, Jin Xingming ran into some kind of trouble and sought refuge at Jinya's place. It didn't take long for Bell and Oligenuo to find him and discuss leaving the imperial capital to have some fun. After all, the semester exams were over. Although he had passed the passing line by flying at a low altitude, he had still passed the exam. It didn't matter how many points he got. Therefore, the three of them decided to go out and celebrate. Jin Xingming could also avoid his father's punishment. After all, he couldn't hide in Jinya's place forever. Even if his father didn't say anything, his grandfather would fly into a rage and punish him even more severely. Jinya told Silin to tag along when he learned about this. Sillin had read most of the tutorials Guan Feng had given him, and it was nothing for someone with a good memory. To show his support, Jinya gave Sillin a huge sum of money and told him to buy whatever Sillin thought and play whatever he wanted. There was no need for him to be stingy or afraid of trouble. At the same time, he gave Jin Xingming some pocket money. Belle and Oliganuo's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Wouldn't they be over the moon if they had a relative like this? Grandpa, too. You really are my real grandpa. Jin Xingming put away the money and smiled so widely that his eyes turned into slits. Jinya knocked Jin Xingming's head with a smile. Your grandpa will spank your ass until it bleeds if he finds out. Jin Xingming winked at him. Then don't let him find out. While they were discussing where to go to celebrate, Belle's younger sister, the girl known as King Kong Kenency, came over as well. Kenency behaved quite appropriately and even brought a few small gifts. They were all tonics. Moreover, there were some fish that were specially prepared for Huimao. However, most of them were ornamental fish. After learning that there was a fish pond here, Kenency spent a lot of effort to get her hands on a few rare species. They looked extremely beautiful, and many high nobles liked to decorate their homes with them. However, in Huimao's opinion, what was the point of having beautiful fish? It was fine as long as they tasted good. Therefore, when Kenency brought out the fish, Huimao swallowed one and smacked his lips with a look of disdain. Kenency's eyes twitched uncontrollably at the sight. Kenency immediately contacted someone and told them a few species of fish for them to be sent over as soon as possible. Kenency had nothing better to do at school right now, and the lectures of the academicians were like heavenly books to her. When she learned that Belle and Oliganuo had come looking for Jin Xingming, she immediately understood that the three of them were planning to escape again. That was why she rushed over and forcefully joined them. No matter what Belle said, she wouldn't go back to AF3 no matter what. She was bored to death at AF3, and she couldn't go to AF1 to play with King Kong and the others all the time. She might as well go out and relax. If the two up there find out, they're going to scold me again. Belle was very reluctant. His mother always blamed him for Kenency's crooked appearance. It was such an injustice. No, they won't. I'll report it to them when the time comes, Kenency said indifferently. Belle curled his lips. What's the point of reporting it? I'll still be the one taking the blame in the end. All right. Kenency suddenly remembered something and clapped her hands excitedly. Let's go to Naimi's place. I want to order a flying car. I heard that they're developing a new model, so I'm going to get one myself. Did Naimi run away too? Jin Xingming asked. He ran away a long time ago. He ran away right after the semester exams were over and before the results were out. I suspect that he's hiding something from us. Kenency said. Oliganuo nodded in agreement. Yes, he deserves to be punished. How unkind of him to run away when there's something good to do. Jin Xingming knew that Sillin didn't know Naimi, so he gave him a simple introduction. Naimi was a direct descendant of the Sizer family. He was about the same age as Jin Xingming and the others, and he was also studying at AF3. However, just like Jin Xingming and the others, he spent a lot more time skipping classes than attending classes. The Sizer family, huh? Jinya thought for a moment. That family that's famous for making flying cars, isn't it? They're a good family. Yeah, Grandpa too. I'll pass on your compliment to them. I'm sure they'll be overjoyed to hear it, Jin Xingming said. Bootlicker, Kenency muttered. It's better than a useless bootlicker. Jin Xingming was referring to the fish Huimao looked down upon by Kenency. Jinya waved his hands when he saw that the two were about to start arguing again. All right. I'll give you two a mission this time. Jinya then turned to Sillin and said, Go with them to the Sizer family and order a flying car. We'll need it when we bring it back here. The Sizer family's custom-made flying cars are pretty good, and it's only natural for young people to need a flying car. Although it sounded like he was asking Belle, Kenency, and the others to help Sillin look for a custom-made flying car, he was actually asking Belle and the others to hold the fort for Sillin. After all, Sillin wasn't a noble, and the Sizer family was a pretty influential noble family. Nobles were used to putting on airs and looking down on others in front of non-nobles. Jinya was afraid that Sillin would be at a disadvantage if he went to the Sizer family. Although they were good for nobles, they weren't stupid. Naturally, they understood the meaning behind Jinya's words. Don't worry, Grandpa too. Silen's my brother. I'll never forgive anyone who dares to bully my brother. Jin Xingming promised again and again. Yeah, don't worry. No one will dare to bully us while we're here. Olegenuo also said. Bell had an odd look on his face. Actually, you shouldn't underestimate Silen too much. We might even need Silen's face when the time comes. What do you mean? Jinya asked curiously. Bell told him about the incident when he went to the 23rd star region to experience life. Jinya didn't know Fleeka. Fleeka didn't exist at the time of the incident, but after listening to Bell's explanation, he understood that Fleeka was a very important member of the Sizer family's flying car designers. He was also the backbone of the Sizer family and had a lot of say in important decisions. Jinya felt a lot more at ease now that he knew Fleeka. He was also glad that Silen was able to get to know these important people. A person's influence wasn't limited to their personal strength. It was also related to the connections they held. At first, Jinya thought that Silen was a taciturn person who didn't speak much or care much about anything, and that he would suffer a loss when it came to connections. He didn't think that Silen was far more capable than he thought. Jinya was very pleased. He felt like his own child had grown up, and he was very proud of the fact that the little boy who was abandoned in the forest had slowly grown into a person who couldn't be underestimated. Okay. Jinya sighed emotionally for a moment before saying, Silen, the thing on your finger represents me. You don't have to hide it when you need it. As a symbol of the Jin family, the leaf pattern on Silen's finger was no less important than the one on Jin Xingming's wrist. Therefore, Jinya wanted to let Silen know that he had the Jin family and the Fuji royal family behind him, and that he wasn't inferior to the nobles. After deciding to visit the Sizer family, the group prepared to depart immediately. However, Silen was a little worried about Hui Mao. The person Kinensi contacted earlier had delivered a batch of fish to them. Unlike the ornamental fish they had received earlier, these fish were strong and practical. Many of these fish had sharp teeth, and some of them were poisonous. However, they tasted delicious if they were properly processed. They were fat, tender, and tasty. Hui Mao's eyes widened and his drool dripped as he stared at the fish jumping happily in the pond. This is what it means to store food. This is what it means to live. Hui Mao wanted nothing more than to jump into the pond and have intimate contact with these fish, but Silen twisted the back of his neck to talk to him. At first, Hui Mao was planning to go for a stroll with Silen, but Hui Mao changed his mind after seeing these fish. He decided to guard this fish pond and let Jinya continue to fill it up. Then he would invite some of his friends from AF1 over for a gathering. Silen was a little worried about Hui Mao's change of mind. The frequency at which Hui Mao's tail was wagging was enough to tell that he was up to something again. That's enough, Silen. Let we stay here and keep this old man company, Jinya said. Silen no longer objected since Jinya had spoken. However, he still twisted Hui Mao's ear and gave him a bunch of instructions. Silen knew Hui Mao's capabilities all too well. He wouldn't lose to Jin Xingming and the others in a fight. I know. Do you think I'm that kind of stupid cat? Hui Mao promised. You're that kind of stupid cat. However, Silen didn't say this out loud. He only replied in his mind. After everything was settled, Silen, Jin Xingming, and the others left the Imperial Star region for the Sizer family's headquarters. Inside Jinya's courtyard, Hui Mao walked around the fish pond. After thinking for a while, he finally ran up to Jinya, who was resting on a rocking chair with his eyes closed. He jumped onto Jinya's lap, found a comfortable position, and squatted down. Then he called out sweetly, Master Grandpa too. If Silen was here, he would definitely have goosebumps all over his body. Jinya opened his eyes and looked at Hui Mao, who was looking at him expectantly. He smiled and scratched Hui Mao's chin. What is it? Master Grandpa too. Let's eat fish every day. Sure. I want to eat the whole fish set meal, grilled fish burger, and Hui Mao used his claws to list out the menu he had been saving for the past few years. His eyes grew brighter and brighter as he spoke, and Jinya couldn't help but laugh. All right. I'll tell him to make it. Right, these fish are all gone after we finish them. Master Grandpa, too. We need to keep replenishing them. Look at how smoothly this cat uses the word we. All right, I'll tell them. I'll have them deliver any fish you like. Kui Mao's grin almost reached his ears as he rubbed his head against Jinya's hand. You really are my real grandpa, Jinya. Jinya was about to say something when he suddenly saw something out of the corner of his eye. He wasn't sure at first, but after a while, he was sure that his eyes weren't playing tricks on him. That egg moved. Hui Mao was still immersed in his beautiful fantasy and didn't react immediately when he heard Jinya's words. That egg. Jinya pointed at the sea beast egg that Hui Mao had ignored for a long time. It moved on its own just now. Chapter 259. The Sizer family's headquarters were located in Star Region 9 of the Empire. Although the Sizer family was very influential in the Empire, and there were several families more famous than the Sizer family, the Sizer family was the most influential family in Star Region 9. After Sillin and the others entered Star Region 9, more than 90% of the media reports they came across were about the Sizer family, and 80% of them were about the same thing. The Winds of Freedom flying car race was sponsored by the Sizer family. It was a famous race in Star Region 9, and even the entire Mist Bodhisattva Empire. Rumor had it that the ancestors of the Sizer family had been besieged by a disaster before flying was as convenient as it was now. In the end, they sent out a small group of people to search for supplies in flying cars. The first time they tried, only half of the group made it back. The second time, they sent out another group of people to search for supplies, and then a third, a fourth. Finally, after risking their lives again and again to search for supplies, the Sizer family was able to survive. It was also because of this that flying cars became an indispensable tool for the Sizer family. The veracity of the story had yet to be verified, but it had to be said that the Sizer family had an extraordinary passion for flying cars. If a member of the Sizer family couldn't drive a flying car, then they had no right to stay in the family. For some reason, those who couldn't drive a flying car would be ridiculed and ostracized by the entire family. Today, the Sizer family's Whirlwind flying car had become the most famous brand in the entire empire. It had also become a symbol of status for many people. If a nobleman who loved racing didn't own a Whirlwind, they would definitely be laughed at by many people. Those who couldn't afford a Whirlwind would always fantasize about when they could own one of their own. An ancestor of the Sizer family once said that he hoped that the first thing everyone thought of when they talked about flying cars would be Whirlwind. Today, this ancestor's wish was basically fulfilled. It had to be said that the Sizer family's Winds of Freedom flying car race had greatly increased Whirlwind's influence. The race was to prove that Whirlwind wasn't just for show. Whirlwind represented a philosophy, a pursuit, and more importantly, a skill. The Winds of Freedom didn't have a qualifier. Most of the participants were famous racers from other flying car races, including individuals and racing teams. The Sizer family would share a portion of the cost of modifying their cars, and they would also provide some parts for free. All participating cars and racers would wear the Whirlwind logo on their racers' uniforms. It was a golden brand. Whirlwind's influence was truly great. The prize money was generous, the reputation was guaranteed, and if a racer's design caught the eye of the Sizer family's eye, the Sizer family would buy it. There was no way Jin, Xingming, and the others would miss out on the Winds of Freedom. They had watched the entire process of the last Winds of Freedom race. Even now, they could still remember the excitement they felt when they watched the race. Sillin had only watched Yudo's race when it came to large-scale flying car races. As for the Winds of Freedom that Jin, Xingming, and the others mentioned, it was obvious that the scale and investment of this race was much larger than Yudo's Acerella race. Don't tell me that Kid Naimi left so early because of this? Oleganuo asked. Kenensi nodded. It's possible. It's a large-scale race his family is hosting. He has to go back to help, right? But isn't there still some time before the Winds of Freedom? It's too early for Naimi to go back right after the semester exams. There's still a long time before the Winds of Freedom. Jin, Xingming, and Bell disagreed with Oleganuo's words. Based on their understanding of Naimi, the kid wouldn't be too enthusiastic if it was purely to help. In fact, he would delay it until the start of the race, just in time to watch the race. If that's the case, then why did Naimi run away in advance? Who knows? We'll meet that kid soon enough. We'll know when we ask him. Zhen Xingming and the others flew straight to the Sizer family's headquarters on the spaceplane. The Sizer family's chief steward was very friendly when he saw Zhen Xingming and the others. After all, they were all members of the royal family, and they were all familiar faces. The head steward was very curious about Silen, but it wasn't his place to ask. A person who could come together with Zhen Xingming and the others and act so casually must have a powerful background. The head steward sent someone to contact Naimi while he was receiving Zhen Xingming and the others. Not long after, the Naimi that Zhen Xingming and the others were talking about appeared before Silen even finished his cup of tea. He looked like he had just woken up. His hair was a mess, and his clothes had been smoothed out by the servants at the last minute, but wrinkles were still visible. Naimi looked very lethargic. Naimi ran out while yelling, but his expression showed that he was surprised by Zhen Xingming and the others' arrival. He looked like he had been constipated for a few days. Naimi greeted Zhen Xingming and the others after he saw them. Then, he turned around on Silen and pulled himself back into the chair like a spineless coward. Silen learned how these people interacted with each other from Naimi's casual greeting. Zhen Xingming and the others didn't reveal their royal status in front of Naimi either. "What's wrong, Naimi?" Belle asked. "I heard that you came back as soon as the semester exams were over. Why are you in such a hurry? There's still time before the flying car race." "Don't mention it." Naimi waved a hand and said weakly, "For years ago, they said that I was too young to drive a flying car, so I wasn't allowed to participate in the race. That's why I tried my best to participate in the flying car race this time. I even participated in a few small races on a few planets before this, so I definitely qualified. But I was unconditionally rejected again." Zhen Xingming was very calm. "It's basically impossible for people of our status to participate in a race of that scale. My father would probably send someone to drag us back before we could even climb into the car. It's already kind enough that he let us out, so don't even think about participating in the race. There's no way King Fuji would trust someone without skills." Kennedy mocked without holding back. Zhen Xingming glanced sideways at her. "Yeah, I don't have skills, but do you? If you can turn a flying car into a bumper car, don't make a fuss here." "Bullshit. That was an accident." Hey, Kennedy, you're a royal princess at the end of the day. Don't curse every time you open your mouth." Naimi said. "It's none of your business." Celine smiled as she watched these people bicker. At the same time, she also observed the layout of the surroundings. It had to be said that every place in the Sizer family was decorated in a flying car style. The wall lamps looked like the front of a car, and the murals were filled with all kinds of flying cars. Some of the decorations had a mysterious style to them as well. "Hey, Naimi, is your uncle here? We have something we need to talk to him about." Zhen Xingming finally stopped arguing with Kennedy and changed the subject. "My uncle? Which uncle?" Naimi couldn't figure out who Zhen Xingming was talking about. The Sizer family was so big, and there were so many uncles and aunts. Who knew which one he was talking about? That fatty Fleeka. Naimi looked at Zhen Xingming warily the moment he heard the name. "Why are you looking for him?" "Let me tell you something first. I've already booked him. If you want him to design a flying car for you, you'll have to queue behind me. By the way, this is the number of people who have asked my fat uncle to design a flying car." Oligachi looked at Naimi's 2 fingers and said, 20, 200. Naimi swayed his feet. His fat uncle was very popular, and everyone hoped that he would design a car for them. After all, they were all members of the Sizer family, and Naimi would feel proud and honored if his uncle was famous. "TSK, look at you. It's not like you're the one designing it, so stop being so cocky." Zhen Xingming threw a nut at Oligachi. Naimi caught it and put it in his mouth. He continued to chew on it and continue to show off. "But to be honest, my fat uncle doesn't have the time to design a flying car right now. The Winds of Freedom is about to start, and I'm very busy. My father told me to stop the people who want to ask him to design a flying car, but I can't stop you. If you really want my fat uncle to design a flying car, you can talk to him yourself. I'm not going to be a sinner." Naimi couldn't afford to offend the royal family, and he didn't want to be punished by his father. "Naimi, Is your fat uncle very busy? So busy that he can't even come and meet us? Belle asked. Of course he'll come if you ask him as a prince, Naimi answered seriously. Then forget it. We're probably not going to get our dream flying car if we keep putting on airs here. Olagachi knew Fleeka's personality very well. What do you think, Silin? Jin Xingming turned to Silin and asked. Naimi looked at Jin, Xingming, and the others' expressions before re-evaluating Silin. He couldn't understand why these royal descendants were treating Silin like this. It wasn't easy to gain the approval of Jin, Xingming, and the others, and they hadn't been this polite to anyone other than the royals before. It was obvious that Silin wasn't a member of the royal family either. Silin thinks about Jin Xingming's words for a moment before saying, since he doesn't have the time, let's go find him. Sure, it's not like we have anything better to do anyway. Why don't we check out the pre-race preparations for the Winds of Freedom? Belle was very much in agreement. His eyes were sparkling with excitement, and no one could tell what he was thinking. Jin Xingming and the others didn't object either, so they clapped their hands and headed straight for Fleeka's place. Coincidentally, Fleeka was at home today. He had been investigating the Winds of Freedom for a very long time, and he was very tired as of late. He was planning to go home and rest for a while, and he had ordered his men to stand guard outside his house and ignore anyone who tried to enter. Fleeka was annoyed to death by those nobles who pretended to be smart and cool, so he had a backer and an excuse to stop them from entering his family's territory. His family had even sent a guard squad to help him keep them away. It didn't matter if they were nobles or relatives. They didn't care no matter how much money they had to pay to stop them from leaving. Money? The Sizer family really didn't care. There were a lot of people watching from the entrance of Fleeka's manor. Most of them were sent here to scout for information, and they would report to their master the moment Fleeka showed up. The guard of the Sizer family, standing outside the mansion, looked like they wanted nothing more than to shoot these shifty-eyed people at them. That was why the guards' expressions were dark and solemn. It looked like they were ready to kill anyone who dared to come near them. However, when a flying car flew over and stopped right in front of the entrance, the guards felt bitter inside. They were all too familiar with this car. This little ancestor had caused a lot of trouble in the past few days. Although they knew that it was Naimi, the guards didn't open the door at first. They just stood there and looked straight ahead. However, their backs were sweating, and they were ready to argue with this little ancestor. However, when Naimi rolled down the car window, the guards felt even more bitter inside when they saw who was sitting inside. This lineup is seriously unstoppable. If Naimi was alone, the guard could stop him. But the people inside the car were all descendants of the royal family, and all three of them at once. If they stopped him, there was no telling what kind of bad news or rumors would spread one day. Naimi saw the guards' pale faces and knew that they were in a difficult situation. So he said, I'll take responsibility for everything. I was waiting for you to say that. The guards quickly let them through after hearing Naimi's words. Some of the passers-by outside craned their necks to see what was going on, but the windows of the flying car were all closed, and they couldn't see who was inside. Fleeka had just fallen asleep when he heard his beloved nephew shouting at the top of his lungs. Uncle Fatty, my dear Uncle Fleeka, your smart, cute, handsome, and charming nephew is here to see you. Right now, Fleeka really wanted to throw his smart, cute, handsome, and charming nephew into the toilet. He's calling his soul. Fleeka covered his ears and rolled on the bed. Unfortunately for him, Naimi was too familiar with this place, and the servants didn't stop him at all. Therefore, Fleeka's desire to get some rest couldn't be fulfilled. Fleeka sat up in his pajamas and swayed to the door in a daze. When he opened the door, he saw the people standing outside. He blinked and blinked again. Fleeka yelled and jumped to his feet, the fat on his face jiggling like waves. It really is you, kid. Hello, we meet again, Silin said. Fleeka pushed aside Naimi, who was the closest to the door, and strode toward Silin. He completely ignored the four royal descendants who were standing at the side. Then, Fleeka patted Silin's body hard and squeezed Silin's arm. He grinned and said, I knew I wasn't dreaming. Naimi's face twitched. My dear uncle, I'm your nephew, your blood. How dare you ignore the smart, cute, handsome, and charming nephew standing in front of you? That being said, Naomi was even more curious about Scylla now. Although this uncle of his was kind, he wouldn't show his true feelings on his face. However, even an idiot could tell that this uncle was genuinely happy about Scylla's arrival. Didn't he push his own nephew to the side? Uncle Fatty, do you know each other? Naomi looked at Fleeka and Scylla before sweeping his gaze across Jin, Xingming, and the others. Yes, we're old friends. Hee, it's been a long time since we last met, so we should have a good chat. What a coincidence. I have some business to take care of together, so I don't have to worry so much with you around. What a timely reign. Fleeka dragged Scylla and ran towards the workshop. Naomi was incredibly shocked by Fleeka's words. He didn't even have time to digest Fleeka's words before he saw Fleeka running towards the workshop in his pajamas. It was common knowledge that Fleeka would change into his work clothes every time he went to the workshop because it was dirty and radioactive. Hey, Uncle Fatty, you're still wearing your pajamas. Naomi ran towards Fleeka and stopped him. In the end, Fleeka didn't change into his work clothes, but he didn't enter the workshop either. After all, there were other guests here, and they were all royal guests no less. It was only right and proper for him to leave them behind. He invited Jin, Xingming, and the others to rest in the workshop and listen to their reason for coming here. A flying car, huh? Fleeka paused for a moment before continuing. Of course I can make a flying car for you, but I absolutely don't have the time right now. You should have heard about this from Naomi. Jin, Xingming, and the others nodded in understanding. If I want to build a flying car, I'll have to wait until after the Winds of Freedom race. Moreover, I'll have to postpone it for some time after the race. That's because after every race, I'll have to conduct a statistical analysis on the performance of several models and their performances in the race. Then I'll absorb the models that are worth developing and modify the existing models. Jin, Xingming, and the others couldn't wait any longer, but they couldn't say anything. Fleeka was already giving them enough face by telling them all this. If it were anyone else, Fleeka would have pushed it back again and again, even if he put on a smiling face. That was why they had to endure Fleeka's promise, even if the deadline had to be pushed back. But Scylla, you don't need me to design a flying car, do you? You should be able to do a great job with your abilities. Hey, why don't we design one together? Chapter 260. Scylla was a little tempted by Fleeka's suggestion, but he also understood that he was far inferior to Fleeka when it came to designing a flying car. The best he could do was to modify some of the assembly processes and make them more complete. Scylla was well aware of his own limitations when it came to designing a flying car as a whole. In order to design a good racing car, one must not only have a good understanding of flying cars, but also experience. Scylla had never designed a real racing car before. He had only tinkered with a few small parts in Mohang's workshop, and that could only be considered partial engineering. He had absolutely no experience in designing a complete racing car. Scylla didn't know much about racing. Even though he had heard a lot about it and read a lot of information about it, he could only design a better flying car after experiencing it for himself. Different weather conditions, different geographical environments, and different habits of racers all had different standards. After Fleeka showed some documents to Scylla knew that he wasn't suited to design a flying car right now. In the Winds of Freedom race, during the course of the race, the flying cars would pass through rainforests, erupting muddy swamps, howling glaciers and snowy lands, vast deserts, winding mountain roads, and other different weather conditions. Moreover, the complicated weather and geographical environments were not the only thing that was different from the flying car races Scylla had experienced in the past. Basically, there were two people on each flying car. Every racing car would have a driver and a navigator, each of them performing their own duties. The racer only had to drive, and he needed to fully display his superb driving skills. The so-called navigator, on the other hand, not only had to arrange some trivial matters during the race, but he also had to point out the correct direction and route for the racer during each stage and provide timely and accurate information about the road conditions ahead during the stage. This kind of cooperation undoubtedly lightened the driver's burden in this long-distance race. Almost all the participating racers were paired up with each other. After all, this race was too much of a test for a driver's ability, and there were a lot of unexpected situations that could occur during the race. If the driver was alone, Not only would he have to fly the car safely under those dangerous conditions, he would also have to pay attention to any external factors that might change at any moment. Not everyone's brain capacity was as great as a robot's. Therefore, the two of them were the best and safest combination. It wasn't easy for a team to nurture an outstanding racer, and it wasn't easy to modify a racing car either. While they were fighting for the championship, they certainly weren't willing to take on such a huge risk. If a two-passenger flying car wanted to gain an advantage in a race, then the design had to be different from a single-passenger flying car. Fleeka had been trying to convince Cylin to join him and design a modified flying car with him all this time. It wasn't every day that they ran into each other, and Fleeka wasn't going to let the opportunity slip away so easily. For a very long time after he was forcibly captured by his son, Fleck's mind would always picture Cylin assembling the parts whenever he was assembling a flying car. Then, he would look at the people around him assembling the car, and he could only sigh and sigh again and again. After all, after seeing better techniques, a person's bottom line would naturally rise. That was why Fleeka's emotions were very unstable during that time. Other than his sighs, the dissatisfaction and regret in his eyes when he looked at the self-proclaimed excellent assemblers was enough to give anyone goosebumps. Everyone except Bell looked surprised by Fleeka's persistence, especially Naimi. After he saw his fat uncle's reaction, he even winked at Jin Xingming and the others as if to say, "I didn't think you'd invite an expert over." Jin Xingming looked very innocent. Bell had told him a bit about Cylin, but he didn't think that Cylin would be able to convince the famous Fleeka to coax and pester him. Cylin looked at the information about the race and some of the past champion flying cars in his hands. Most of these flying cars couldn't even be called flying cars anymore. They had different shapes, and they were completely different from normal flying cars. Crescent moon-shaped and knife-shaped ones were the more normal ones. Seeing that Cylin was silent, Fleeka stopped talking and moistened his throat with a cup. Judging from Cylin's expression, he was probably thinking about it carefully. "I'm sure he'll change his mind if I push him a little harder." Just when Fleeka put down his cup and was about to continue, Cylin suddenly asked, "How do I qualify for the race?" "You want to participate in the race?" Fleeka completely forgot what he was about to say. He only knew that Cylin was a great assembler, but he had never seen Cylin race before. Judging from Cylin's background, Cylin shouldn't be able to race, should he? It wasn't that Fleeka looked down on Cylin. It was because Cylin's living conditions were too poor. Racing a car cost a lot of money, and Fleeka had always thought that Cylin's age didn't have the time to practice his assembly skills. Moreover, Cylin's first impression didn't make him look like any of the other racers Fleeka had seen at his age. Fleeka wasn't the only one who was surprised. Jin Xingming, Bell, and the others were just as surprised. Before Cylin got involved with the Jin family, he shouldn't have been able to participate in a big race like the Winds of Freedom, right? Moreover, Jin, Xingming, and the others had never heard of Cylin in some of the smaller races. Could it be that Cylin was one of those unknown races? "Cylin, you need to think this through carefully. This race is very dangerous," Jin Xingming said seriously. If the race wasn't as dangerous as it was, Jin Xingming and the others would have willingly participated despite their family's objections. However, it was exactly because they knew the risks that they couldn't afford to risk their lives when their families had increased their opposition. This was an exciting and high-risk race, and it was enough for them to experience the excitement of it from the outside. A lot of people's legs would turn to jelly if they were to actually participate in it. Moreover, if something really happened to Cylin, how was he going to explain it to his second grandfather? "Do you really want to participate? Are you serious?" Fleeka asked seriously. Cylin nodded. "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." Jin Xingming's face was bitter. Of course he was worried. In order to make things easier for Jin Xingming, Cylin contacted Jinya. To Jin Xingming's surprise, Jinya only asked Cylin if he really wanted to participate. After he confirmed that Cylin really wanted to participate, he even said, "Be careful and have fun." Jin Xingming felt that his second grandfather was too lenient with Cylin. What he didn't know was that Jinya had agreed to the race directly because he understood Cylin's personality very well. Moreover, Jinya felt that Cylin needed something to vent his pent-up frustrations. After all, there were too many stories about Scylla. He had suddenly arrived in this unfamiliar galaxy, and he didn't even know if he could return to his original galaxy. Moreover, Scylla had subconsciously touched the bone crystal hanging around his neck after Jinya woke up. Jinya was aware of this, but he couldn't do anything about it. Jinya was in hibernation, and the child was truly gone. Jin Xingming didn't say anything else since Jinya had agreed to it. At the same time, after a moment of worry, Jin Xingming and the others suddenly felt a surge of excitement. Scylla was going to participate in the race, and this was a true brothers competition. It was much more exciting than watching someone else compete. Jin Xingming was already imagining himself pointing at the speeding car and shouting, "Look, that's my bro." It would be impossible for anyone else to participate in the race under these circumstances, but Scylla had Fleeka's help, so it wasn't entirely impossible. The name list had been decided a long time ago, and it was announced to the public as well. Every participant had a name list, and it was a little troublesome to force Scylla into the list. But Fleeka would definitely help him if he really wanted to participate in the competition. No matter what, he was the vice chairman of the organizing committee. The Winds of Freedom committee would definitely give him face if he showed up. Fleeka thought that he'd just have to put up with those people's faces for the time being. But if Scylla wins a prize in a race, those racing teams will probably die of depression. Kennedy smiled, but it will also hurt some people's interests. Bell and the others were more or less aware of some of the secret transactions that took place. For example, gambling. Scylla shook his head. "I just want to participate in the race. My name isn't on the official name list, and I don't care if I win or not. I'm not interested in awards at all." Fleeka understood Scylla's intentions immediately. He wanted to experience the race himself in preparation for designing a flying car. Only by participating in the race would he be able to come up with a stronger idea and experience. Fleeka had done the same thing when he was younger. "All right, I understand what you're trying to say. Leave it to me." While saying this, Fleeka went into his room and contacted someone to take care of some paperwork. A while later, Fleeka came out of his room and said that he had spoken to the decision-makers of the organizing committee. Right now, all Scylla needed to do was to design a flying car according to his own preferences. "I have a few prototype flying cars that aren't finished yet, but you can take a look and choose one to participate in the race," Fleeka said. Fleeka's main workplace wasn't on the Sizer family's planet, so everything related to the Winds of Freedom race would be held at the host venue, the planet also named Whirlwind. Since the decision was made, and Fleeka was going back to work anyway, he called Scylla, Jin Xingming, and the others to come with him. Under Fleeka's guidance, they didn't need to check their identities at all. To better prepare for the Winds of Freedom race, the entire planet was under a semi-closed management. Only the relevant personnel were allowed to enter. The racing teams, maintenance personnel, and the organizers were allowed to enter, but the people who had booked tickets to watch the race weren't allowed to enter just yet. It was obvious that Jin Xingming and the others couldn't sit still after they entered Whirlwind Planet. The moment they arrived, they couldn't help but recall the craziness, adrenaline overflowing, excitement, and roaring that they felt like their lungs were about to burst out of their lungs when they came here to watch the race 4 years ago. This was the influence this Whirlwind Planet had on every visitor. Anyone who had watched the race even once would have a deep impression of it, especially the flying car enthusiasts and youngsters like Jin Xingming. The emotions of young people were the easiest to stir up. Right now, the first thing Fleeka needed to do wasn't to bring Scylla and the others to his workshop to look at the cars. Instead, he needed to bring Scylla to the organizing committee to obtain the documents and certificates. Without them, Scylla wasn't allowed to enter the racetrack at all. The organizing committee had been very busy lately, and they had to deal with racing teams and racers from all over the world every day. Fortunately, Fleeka was the one who showed up, so everyone gave him face. The chief of the organizing committee was the one who brought in the documents and certificates. The chief was an old member of the Sizer family, and he had been in charge of the Winds of Freedom race for many years. This time, the chief had no choice but to show up in person because Fleeka had interceded. Right now, he was the only one who could keep Fleeka in check. Many people in the organizing committee didn't say anything about Fleeka's behavior on the surface, but they all had their own opinions about it. Therefore, The chief had to explain some things to Fleeka so that he could forestall such a situation from happening again. Fleeka had expected the chief's cold expression since a long time ago, so he could only smile and pretend that he didn't care when the chief handed them the documents. "We made an exception this time because of you. Please don't let something like this happen again." "I know. It was a special situation this time, and I'll explain it to you in detail later. I'm also aware of the stakes involved, so there won't be a next time." Fleeka smiled and reached out to accept the documents, but the chief ignored Fleeka's outstretched hand and stared straight at Scylla instead. His meaning was obvious. "You're the one who's participating in the race this time. Don't you even have a list of documents?" Scylla didn't want to put Fleeka in a difficult position, so he walked up to him and gave him a simple courtesy, thanked him, and accepted the document with both hands. Fleeka was a senior and the chief of the organizing committee, not to mention that he was the one who helped him with the paperwork. Etiquette was a must. The chief's expression softened a little when he saw how calm and polite Scylla was, and how he accepted the documents with both hands. He didn't look like a good-for-nothing rich kid whose eyes grew on his forehead. However, his pupils shrank when he saw the pattern on Scylla's finger. Although he didn't show much reaction on his face, Scylla could clearly sense that the chief's aura had relaxed quite a bit. He didn't look as serious as before, and he didn't look like someone had stolen a piece of *T from his wall. Fleeka didn't know about this, and he didn't notice what kind of tattoo Scylla's finger was at all. After all, young people like to tattoo themselves these days, so he didn't pay much attention to it. However, the chief's attitude was clearly a lot better than before, and his tone had become a lot warmer. Fleeka was a little puzzled by this, but he didn't probe too deeply into it. An old man at his age was always unpredictable. After the procedures were done, Fleeka left the place with Scylla and went to his workshop. Jin Xingming and the others waited in the flying car outside the office building. They didn't follow them inside. After Scylla and Fleeka had left, the chief immediately contacted the Sizer family. Due to their age and experience, he knew a lot more than Beaver and Fleeka did. Naturally, he knew what the pattern on Scylla's finger represented. If the pattern was real, then they would have to re-evaluate Scylla as a person. Fleeka led Scylla to his workshop. Unlike a small workshop, this place took up a lot of space, and there were some open-air repair points at the periphery. It could be considered a temporary repair station. A lot of racing teams had come here to familiarize themselves with the environment since a long time ago. The racers and crew had to get used to the planet's environment and adjust their bodies to peak condition before the official race. This wasn't a trivial matter, because sometimes a single grain of sand could decide a race's success or failure. Fleeka's mood had obviously improved a lot after Scylla's arrival. He didn't look tired at all, and he even gave Scylla some tips to pay attention to while he was working in front of the flying car. He even told Scylla what kind of weather and terrain each modified part was best suited for. The tournament had a certain limit on the size, weight, displacement, power, and so on of a modified race car. Every race car team and racer was free to do whatever they wanted within these limits. Right now, Fleeka was giving Scylla a general direction so that he wouldn't take any detours. The people who had worked under Fleeka for a long time were guessing which family's young master he belonged to when they saw how Fleeka was treating Scylla. Even Naimi was ignored by Fleeka right now. At first, Jin Xingming and the others had followed Fleeka to observe and learn a thing or two in the name of enriching their brains. But after 2 days, they lost their patience. Bell might know a thing or two about racing, but he preferred watching the racers more than anything else. Therefore, Jin Xingming and the others gave up under Fleeka's barrage of technical jargon and went to watch the racers practice together. Fleeka had a lot of work to teach Scylla, and he didn't want to take up all of Fleeka's time. Therefore, 3 days later, Scylla said that he would practice with the maintenance staff at the periphery of the workshop first. He wanted to learn more about the racing cars while he was repairing them. Fleeka didn't object. He really was busy. Scylla's assembly skills could be called a classic. It was so classic that it looked like a priceless work of art. The workers here no longer thought of Scylla as a short-lived brat, and they answered all of Scylla's questions enthusiastically. Today, Scylla had just finished repairing a flying car. He got up to drink a bottle of water, and take a break when a fiery red flying car flew into the workshop. A 15 or 16-year-old girl dressed in racing attire hurriedly got out of the car and scanned her surroundings. When she saw Sillin in his work attire, she walked straight towards Sillin. Chapter 261. Hey, it's you. Yes, it's you. Come here for a second. Sillin put down his water bottle and looked at the female racer who was wearing a racing uniform and a helmet. He couldn't see her face clearly. Judging from her voice, she sounded like a pretty young girl. Come here and help us look after the flying car. We're in a hurry, the girl said before dragging Sillin to the side of the flying car. While Sillin was familiarizing himself with the racing flying cars, Fleeka tossed him a set of uniform that fitted him just like the other workers. He had to pay attention to his own protection during maintenance, and there were some things that couldn't be touched carelessly. Those with weak immune systems would get sick if they came into contact with them, such as local radiation, a pilot error, or a heavy metal gas leak from the car's high temperature caused by an accident. The Sizer family's uniforms were very expensive. Any one of them could easily cost more than 5 digits. It was clear just how rich the Sizer family was. The back of Sillin's uniform and cap was printed with the words Whirlwind Repair Point and the code of the point. Therefore, the girl had directly pulled Sillin over and treated him as a staff member of this place. The flying car was shaped like a triangular pyramid. When it landed on the ground, it changed slightly to make it more agile and stable. When the girl had dragged Sillin to the side of the flying car, the roof was lowered to reveal another girl sitting inside. However, she wasn't sitting in the driver's seat, but the navigator's seat. She had taken off her helmet, revealing a very gentle and pretty face of about 15 or 16 years old. It was hard to imagine that a girl who looked a little shy in front of strangers was a navigator. After the girl had dragged Sillin to the side, she turned on the self-scan display on the control panel. The self-scan value was only 8. 2. Both Fleeka's workplace and outdoor repair point were located on the plains of the planet where the environment was slightly better, but there were a lot of other places that were much worse. Although the main track had been sealed off, the drivers who were familiar with the race could only practice their skills in the areas close to the main track. Even that meant that they had to bear a lot of risks. Even the slightest problem with their flying car had to be dealt with extreme caution, or they would lose their lives before they could even begin. Therefore, as long as a flying car self-inspection system displayed a value below 9, it would have to be repaired at the nearest repair point. This was the most appropriate and dependable way to deal with the situation. Sillin looked at the detailed list of self-tests and asked, "When did the self-test score fall below 9? When we passed through the glacier area, we began to descend. After flying past the glacier area, we began to descend rapidly. After that, we changed our route to come here. After all, this is the nearest repair point. Hey, what's going on? How long will the repairs take? We are in a hurry to go back." It was almost evening in this area, so it was no wonder that the girl was in such a hurry. Once night fell, flying would be much more difficult. "I'll take a look first." Sillin looked at the control panel and entered a series of commands to verify the operation of each part of the flying car. This flying car's configuration was pretty good, and both the primary and secondary operating systems were the latest. The primary and secondary operating systems had been installed according to the habits of the two girls. Male and female racers had different habits and mastery of operating systems, so the appropriate operating systems would also be different. The two girls watched as Sillin quickly flipped through the list of characters that they couldn't understand. They looked at each other. "This guy, he's not just putting on an act, is he?" He flipped through it so quickly, they couldn't see it clearly at all. They couldn't see it clearly, but for Sillin, this was just his normal speed. His fingers suddenly stopped. Sillin looked at one of the lines, then entered a command on the control panel and walked to the back of the car. The moment he placed his fingers on the car, Sillin was able to clearly understand the structure of this car, and a detailed structural diagram had already appeared in his mind. Therefore, he quickly found the right spot for the flying car. He pushed it at a seemingly random angle, and the outer shell of the rear of the flying car popped up. To prevent Sillin from tampering with the flying car, the helmeted girl stood on the side to supervise him. After the outer shell popped up, Sillin quickly removed some of the surface components and placed them on the open tool tray next to him. The girl standing next to him raised her hand and put it down again. Hey, be careful. Don't be too careless. From her point of view, Celine must not have taken the components seriously by removing them so quickly. This kind of careless behavior would definitely affect the components. Her brother had said that even the slightest damage to the components would reduce their performance when they were assembled and installed on the car. Tobia, the girl sitting in the car, called out in a low voice and shook her head, indicating that she shouldn't disturb the maintenance staff. It wouldn't be too late to ask for compensation if there really was serious damage, but it was very bad behavior to disturb the maintenance staff when they were doing maintenance. If there really was damage and someone kept chattering on the side during the repair process, the maintenance staff might also shift the blame to the person who was disturbing them. Tobia also remembered those problems after receiving the signal and stopped talking. She let out a humph and stared at Celine's hand movements. But she had just retracted her attention when she saw that Celine had already stopped removing the components. There was an empty space on the flying car, and the maintenance staff was typing something into the communicator on their wrist. Every staff member in the repair station wore a specialized communicator on their wrist. Not only could they use this communicator to communicate with each other, they could also order the service robot stationed at the warehouse. As long as the maintenance staff keyed in the name and model of the required components, the command would be directly transmitted to the warehouse, and the service robots would quickly deliver the components. There was no need for the staff to carry the components and run back and forth. It didn't take long for the service robots to deliver the components Celine needed. It was very simple stuff: a double wire, a few small components, and a small cleaner. Perhaps Celine's actions had piqued the girl's curiosity, but she also got out of the car and came to Tobia's side to watch Celine repair the car. After Celine removed the surface parts, he understood the cause of the car's problem. When the flying car was passing through the glacial zone, one of the components had loosened during the thermostat activation process, causing a very small crack to appear on the outer shell of the flying car. This small crack was not to be underestimated. In such an environment, even a very small crack would allow the cold to penetrate through the loose component and freeze the original double wire to pieces. The aging of the double wire was one reason, but so was the loosening of the component. In truth, the most important reason for these problems was that the combination of the surface components wasn't the most suitable for defense, even if they were using the best components. One should only ask for the best, not the most expensive. Even though the loose components and frozen wires weren't crucial components, and the flying car self-inspection process wouldn't produce any major warnings, the special powder of these double rows of wires, after being charged, would stick to the other components closer to the inside. Moreover, it would cause a large-scale magnetic attenuation and damage to the flying car's internal stability, causing the flying car to enter a serious state. The self-inspection coefficient value would drop below 9.0. Celine used the cleaner to clean up the powder adhering to the inner component, then replaced it with a new wire. He also changed the model and configuration of the surface components so that they were the best match. This way, it would be very difficult for them to loosen unless there was a serious collision. The two girls watched as Celine casually placed the components there like building blocks. The components seemed to be connected very securely, and the ports were very suitable. Celine closed the outer shell after he was done assembling the components. He went to the control panel inside the flying car and began to clean up the minor problems in the main and secondary systems. 10 seconds later, he pressed the self-inspection button. The self-inspection system scanned again and showed a value of 9.7. All right, this value should be able to last until you return to the base, Celine said. The girl, named Tobia, seemed to find it hard to believe. She moved closer to the display panel and saw that the big 9.7 was still there. It didn't change no matter how hard she tried. A little cleaning, a few unimportant components, and it's done. Tobia jumped into the flying car, started it up, and tested it. It really was done. The entire repair process took less than 10 minutes. Tobia had estimated that it would take at least 30 minutes, but it took less than a third of the estimated time. The two girls sat inside the car, raised the roof, and a sealed Mitsubishi cone-shaped flying car rose into the air. Thanks. Tobia's voice came from the external speaker. You're welcome. After everything was done, Scylla walked back to the field. They were wrapping up work already, and the sky was getting dark. That was it for today. He still had to help Fleeka tonight. There were still more than 20 days until the actual race, so Scylla planned to familiarize himself with the various racing cars first. Sharpening one's axe wouldn't hold up one's work, and Fleeka believed that Scylla had the ability to do so. Before that, though, he still needed to find a navigator. Of course, it didn't matter if he couldn't find a suitable navigator in the end. He could handle it by himself. It would be even better if Hui Mao was here. Right now, Scylla was basically fighting alone. Perhaps Fleeka would arrange for some people to be the logistics team's maintenance team. The race was a long flight, and accidents were bound to happen all the time. That was why there was a repair point set up every other circuit, and every team's logistics team would be stationed there. If a team's car needed to be repaired or modified, they would do their best to get it done as soon as possible. After all, there was a minimum time limit for the race. If a racer couldn't reach it within this time limit, they would be eliminated, and the eliminated racer wouldn't be included in the final ranking. The team's chances of winning were much higher. After all, they had worked together for a long time to form a tacit understanding. A lot of things could happen in a race, and a single person's strength was too limited. Scylla did not have absolute confidence that he could fight for a place in the top few, but he should be able to finish the race safely. As for the ranking, Scylla didn't care about it all. The ranking would be based on the total number of points the racer earned. All participating cars had to follow the race's prescribed route strictly and arrive at the designated stop within the time limit. The top 10 racers of each race would receive 40, 30, 25, 20, 16, 12, 8, 4, 2, and 1 points respectively. At the end of the race, the total number of points earned by each race would be the racer's final result. Moreover, they had to complete their car's maintenance and testing within the allotted time. The higher a racer's ranking was, the more points they earned and the more advantage they had. After all, the first and 10th place racers were separated by 40 times. It was a pretty big number. Of course, not every racer was an all-rounder. Every racer had their own areas of expertise, and it was possible that the 10th place racer of one race would be the first place racer of the next. Scylla let out a long sigh. He would train here for another 3 days before he started assembling his flying car. After that, he would go familiarize himself with the race's environment. That night, when Scylla walked into Fleeka's personal workshop, he saw Naimi, who he hadn't seen for a couple of days, grinning like he was afraid that someone wouldn't know that something good had happened to him. After seeing Scylla, Naimi hurriedly jumped down from a big box and ran in front of Scylla. The excited expression on his face made him look very silly and stupid. However, Naimi didn't mind his silly and stupid smile at all. He ran over and patted Scylla excitedly. "Brother, let's team up." "Scylla, what's going on?" Coincidentally, Gulaika came over and told Scylla the reason. After watching the race for a couple of days and quarreling with some noble children, Naimi contacted his father and tried to persuade him. In the end, he cried, threw a tantrum, and acted like a hoodlum until his father finally relented. However, he had one condition: Naimi could only be a navigator and not a racer. In the past races statistics, the accident rate of a racer was twice as high as a navigator's. At first, Naimi refused, but this was his father's bottom line. Otherwise, he wouldn't even think about it. In the end, Naimi gave in. But when he remembered that Scylla was also participating in the race, and that he hadn't found a suitable navigator yet, Naimi eagerly came over and asked for Fleeka's permission first. With Fleeka's persuasion, Scylla would agree to it as well. "Scylla, Naimi's grades in the affiliated schools are crap. He looks unreliable, he's always frivolous, and he looks a little stupid when he smiles, but he's still someone who has been exposed to racing since he was young. He knows a lot about racing, and his analytical skills aren't bad either." Fleeka said. At first, Naimi's eyebrows nearly shot up when he heard Fleeka's evaluation of him. "Uncle Fatty, you're my biological uncle. How can you belittle your own nephew like this?" But Naimi finally understood when he heard the latter half of the conversation. "Yes, this is called strategy. Suppress your desires first. As expected, it's Uncle Fatty." Naimi nodded in satisfaction. Then he stared at Scylla with a hopeful look in his eyes that said, "You're committing a sin if you don't agree." The corner of Scylla's eyes twitched a little, but he finally nodded under the expectant gazes of his uncle and nephew. Nami started laughing like an idiot again. Fleeka shot a glance at his nephew before shaking his head. Then he said to Scylla, "This kid has some real talent." His father carried him in his arms and drove him fast even before he was weaned off his mother's milk. It's just that his family never allowed him to participate in this dangerous race. In fact, Scylla only wanted to give Fleeka phase when he agreed to let Nami become his companion navigator. But Scylla had to admit that Nami did have the goods during the assembly process. Nami had provided a lot of practical suggestions when Scylla was designing the flying car. In a flying car race, a powerful engine, good energy blocks, and expensive components weren't the only things that could win a race. It also had to adapt to the weather and emergency situations of each circuit. At the same time, it was also a test of the driver and navigator's ability to adapt to danger and obstacles, the driver's driving skills, the navigator's analysis, and their cooperation. After a few days of getting along with Nami, Scylla had learned a lot more about him. The members of the Sizer family were talented when it came to flying cars. Of course, there was no telling how much they would be able to use this talent to their fullest potential. The first race is Rainbow Heaven, also known as the Rainbow of Beginnings. There are 7 racing tracks with 7 different colors. However, the 7 tracks are intersecting with each other, and we don't know what kind of obstacles or how many bends there are at the end of each track. It's all random. If you're lucky, you'll get out of Rainbow Heaven early, and if you're unlucky, you'll have to waste a lot more time. It's purely a matter of luck. The other end of the track will change after you enter it, so even the designer wouldn't have guessed which track would save you more time. After the Rainbow track, the first ranking for the flying cars would be revealed. This was purely a contest of luck. In order to avoid hesitation at the start and reduce the self-blame after choosing a complex track, many teams would discuss which track to choose before the start of the race. That way, there wouldn't be any subsequent arguments. "What color are we going to choose, Scylla?" Scylla thinks for a moment. This was a matter of luck. Everyone who could participate in this race had real skills, so the temporary ranking of the first race could only be decided based on luck. So what color should we choose? Let's choose the first color we saw when we open our eyes. Are you going to open your eyes, or should I? I don't remember anything for a while after I wake up. I'll open my eyes. All right. Nami unfolded the preliminary design again and continued. We need to configure the tires well, too. If we don't grip the ground tightly during the ice and snow race, we'll be blown away. Therefore, it's best to drive on land during that race. As for tires, I suggest we use narrow nail tires. It'll increase the pressure on the surface of the tires and give them better grip. After the discussion was done, their flying car design was finally finalized. Fleeka's expression turned odd when he saw the final design.